going to be devoted to looking at advanced batteries and electric vehicle megatrends. As you know, there are wonderful things and actually some worrying things also happening in the world of EVs and batteries. So this will bring us up to date and perhaps ahead of everyone else in the world, because we have some world-leading experts to discuss the topic with us. Actually, we want to open today with a welcome remark, first from Dr. Osama Hassanein, who is co-founder of Silicon Valley Business Forum, and he is going to join us for a very brief hello all the way from Silicon Valley. Dr. Hassanein?
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Yoon. It is absolutely my honor and my privilege to be involved in the IEVE Silicon Valley Business Forum. It's been 4 years now focused on sustainability and clean technology, cooperation with institutions, governments, universities, in applications right across from lithium-ion to artificial intelligence applications. And in every case, I have been so impressed with the fact that each and every one of us is actually looking at opportunities for contribution so that we can help build a better life for all. And at the same time, to help entrepreneurs and innovators for business acceleration, financing, and business expansion. So with that in mind, I am absolutely honored to be joining you today. And I think that today and tomorrow, of course, with UC Berkeley and AI, is going to be also an equally amazing day. And I would like you to please forgive me for not wearing a jacket. Would that be okay?
I think you look great. Thank you very much. And I would like to remind everyone that today's session and tomorrow's will be going through simultaneous translation, so simultaneous interpretation. So if you look at your screens, you will be able to choose the language that you like for the conference. Also, I should mention here in the way of housekeeping that there is going to be Q&A sessions, and if you put in your questions into the chat box, then both the moderators, Vincent and Motion, will be able to retrieve your questions and discuss them in the Q&A sessions. As you all know, Dr. Hassanein has been doing wonderful things, bringing Silicon Valley and Korean technologies and business thinking together. And along with Dr. Hassanein, the co-founder of Silicon Valley Business Forum is our beloved Dr. Moon-Gu Kyun. And I would like to ask Dr. Moon-Gu Kyun to say a welcome remark for us. Dr. Moon?
Recording in progress.
Switch.
Allow me to speak in Korean. Allow me to speak in Korean. Thank you very much, Dr. Osama. And I would like to thank your contribution for Silicon Valley Business Forum. And I would like to also thank the members of Silicon Valley Business Forum for your participation and contribution. I know this is a very early morning in Korea because we usually start such forum at 10 o'clock in the morning, but we are starting it 8 o'clock in the morning. So I would like to apologize for the inconvenience caused. But today and tomorrow, for the Silicon Valley Business Forum, in the first day, we are going to talk about advanced batteries, electric vehicles, megatrend, and Chairman Vincent Fluvinas. He is usually staying in Silicon Valley, but he is in London today, so it's 1 o'clock in the morning. So I would like to thank Dr. Vincent Fluvinas for joining us at such a wee hour in London. So I would like to thank Dr. Osama, Dr. Vincent. Please give them a big round of applause. And also joining us from Washington, we have speakers. So they will be joining us from 7 to 10 in the morning. And from Canada, we have Ambassador Brandon Lee, who is joining us from Toronto. So he will be joining us at a very late hour at night. So I would like to ask for your understanding for starting this forum at 8 o'clock in the morning. There are so many people in Korea who wants to improve and strengthen our collaboration with Silicon Valley and with IEVE. We have organized more than 100 sessions, and we are also joined by Chairman Kim Dae-hwan, the chairman of the organizing committee of IEVE, and we are also joined by 3 accelerators from Korea who support 400 startups every year. And this year, he is supporting 500 startups. From Go Venture Forum, we are joined by Chairman Ko Young-ha. Chairman Ko Young-ha is a pioneer in venture capital investment in Korea, and he is leading one of the major venture capital investment company from Korea. So the fact that we are joined by Chairman Ko Young-ha today is going to be a very encouraging sign and support to many participants of startups and venture capital industry in Korea. So he's going to be and has been the biggest champion of our industry from Korea. And we are joined by so many other people, but we won't be able to introduce every one of them, but I believe we'll have a chance to be introduced over the course of today and tomorrow. So Chairman Kim Dae-hwan, Chairman Ko Young-ha, please give them a big round of applause. Thank you once again. I wish you the best of 2 days.
Dr. Moon. We'd like to move straight into the congratulatory remark, first by Chairman Kim Dae-hwan, just introduced by Dr. Moon. Chairman Kim has done a wonderful job putting the IEVE conferences together. This is the 9th IEVE conference being held in Jeju. It is the premier electric vehicle expo seen anywhere around the world. And as you just heard, in this week's conference, we have over 100 sessions being held together. So this is a huge development from 9 years ago when Chairman Kim started with a small group of very die-hard EV fans. So here is Chairman Kim.
I'm very pleased to meet you all. Especially, my gratitude goes to Dr. Moon Guk-hyun. Thank you so much for providing full support to the IEVE, and also the family members of EV, Dr. Osama Hanasain. Thank you so much for launching SVVR and being with us until now. Dr. Osama Hanasain, although it's virtually, I'm very happy to see you in a very healthy way. And yesterday, we had Korea European Union EV roundtable where ambassadors from the EU members took part in. And also we are going beyond ASEAN toward Europe, toward the other countries as well. And in May, usually flowers blossom in Jeju Island. We are gathered here to talk about climate crisis, batteries, self-driving cars, and also even electric ships, and also future directions where we should go. So those are our discussion topics. Every year, we are gathered here in Jeju Island, and we are trying to lead EV and also electrifications of the transportation. And IEVE is held every year, and in order to expand our network, ever since the first time we had IEVE, Dr. Moon Guk-kyung has been with us, and Dr. Osama Hanasain, he's also an honorary chairman of the organizing committee of IEVE. And every quarter, Dr. Hanasain is joining us at the GENE meeting as well as the IEVE board meetings on a regular basis. And also he is in full line with our visions. Of course, last year and the year before, we all suffered COVID-19, but we reaffirmed our commitment and convictions that no matter what happened, even if the war break out, we'll be gathering and we'll be discussing about EV, and that kind of willingness, determination brought us where we are today. Once again, my special gratitude goes to Dr. Osama Hanasain and also Chairman Ko Young-ha. And with me, we have many participants, President Kim Ji-chul, and also other people. Thank you so much for joining us today. I sincerely hope that the fourth Silicon Valley Business Forum will be very meaningful. We have kept our promises and we have built our network as well as our strong relationship based on trust. Thank you so much for everything. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kim Dae-won of IEVE. The amazing thing is that we've gone through terrible difficulties with the pandemic, with the coronavirus, and although social distancing is being relaxed a little bit here in Korea, still the coronavirus is very much with us. So bringing people together, especially from all over the world, has been a tremendous challenge, but nevertheless, we've survived through the difficulties brought on by this fearsome disease, and we're stronger than ever now. And I think going forward, we can look forward to a very successful IEVE for the future. Next, I would like to invite Ambassador Brandon Lee. He is Canada's ambassador to Silicon Valley, and I know that the ambassador has done some tremendous work representing the Foreign Ministry of Canada to the Silicon Valley area, the West Coast of the United States, and parts of the Pacific. So over to you, Ambassador Lee.
Thank you so much, Dr. Yoon. It's my true great honor to participate and support this excellent initiative. Oh, can you hear me?
We can hear you very well.
Okay, so it's my true honor to support this excellent initiative. As mentioned by Dr. Yoon, I am a digital strategist and supporting Canada's relations with Silicon Valley and the West Coast of the United States. But as Dr. Hassanein, his venture fund, I believe the rising tide raises all boats. And I'm happy to bring Canada into this dimension of this business forum to help. And thanks to Chairman Hassanein, Chairman Moon, and Chairman Kim to your generous openness to having my participation. Everything is changing as we are noticing in this world. We are in an inflationary period. We are seeing market corrections. We are seeing revaluations of companies. We have seen, as mentioned by Dr. Yoon, throughout COVID, that supply chains and relationships matter. And one of the things that during my time as ambassador to Silicon Valley, everybody asks, what makes a successful company? And in fact, when we boil things down, two things come out. One is the founder and the management team's vigilant focus on product market fit, which is in the hands of the entrepreneur. But the second thing is the company's ability to attract top talent. And I think this is where the Canadian dimension may be able to help also with the Korean companies and Silicon Valley companies. working with our Prime Minister of Canada, we understand that to become a nation of innovation, we have to be open to immigration. And so we have something called the Startup Visa Program, where, and I joke that a company can hire somebody faster than they can find a place to live. We have a guarantee to give you a startup visa for any of your talent within 10 business days. So this is where, when you look at the top growing cities in North America, the top 5 of the top 6 are Canadian cities, with Toronto being number 1 and Montreal being the second fastest growing city in North America. And for the theme of today's talk, in the past 18 months, just the province of just the province of Ontario has raised $14 billion of new investments in EV production and battery manufacturing. So I think there are a lot of connectivity and opportunities for Korea, Silicon Valley, and Canada to connect together. And so it's really, as I mentioned, my real honor and privilege to support this initiative. And also being Korean Canadian, 한국, 캐나다 사람이니까 한국도 굉장히.
Since I'm a Korean Canadian, I would love to work and support Korea in this initiative.
Thank you, Ambassador Lee. And I should add that from here in Korea, our perspective is that the Silicon Valley is very big and that it is centered around the Bay Area, San Francisco, but it stretches all the way from San Diego, LA to Vancouver in Canada. So everyone is very welcome in terms of Silicon Valley Business Forum. Okay. Next, I think we can move on to the 2 sessions that we have planned for today. These are tremendous discussion opportunities, and I want to thank especially Dr. Vincent Pluvinage. He is going to chair the first session. The second session will follow after that. The reason that we want to give a special mention to Dr. Vincent Pluvinage is that he was so good to put the whole program together, inviting many of the speakers for the sessions today. And as Dr. Moon mentioned, Vincent Pluvinage is actually on a visit to London at the moment, so he is joining us at a crazy hour in London. Dr. Vincent Pluvinage is the founder and chairman of One Battery Sciences, and that is a very special company developing very leading edge technology to do with batteries for electric vehicles, and he will tell us more about that himself. Dr. Vincent has been instrumental in bringing our knowledge here at Silicon Valley Business Forum up to date on the developments of the technology and markets around the world. And most recently, we've been studying a lot about technology and technological developments. Today, I think the shift is going to be more towards looking at ecosystems and supply chain. So I'm delighted, not being a technical person myself, that we move away from all the technical rigor of batteries and EV, and we can talk a little bit more about the business that's going on today and will go on for the future. So without further ado, I would like to ask Dr. Vincent Pluvinage to take over the session and introduce the speakers as we go along. Thank you very much. Over to you, Vincent.
Thank you very much, Eugene, and thank you very much, Chairman Moon, Chairman Kim, Chairman Hasnight. It is an honor to be present with you via Zoom link. Today, I would like to make a few introductory remarks and then present our speakers and give them the podium. I will share a slide, if you don't mind. Can you see this slide?
Yes, very good. We can see it clearly.
Great. As an introductory remark, I'd like to say that my story is like that of many in Silicon Valley. I grew up in Belgium. I went to do a PhD in University of Michigan in the United States. My first job was at AT&T Bell Labs on the East Coast, and I moved then to Silicon Valley to start a company many decades ago. Many of people around the world end up in Silicon Valley because of the availability of talent, the availability of capital, and the ease in which it is possible to drive innovation into successful business ventures. Today, we live in a very special world. And if I take the automotive industry as an example, and our speakers will address that today, the transformation of the automotive industry, which started about a decade ago with the first new EV vehicles and is accelerating every year, is the fastest transformation of any industries globally in the last 100 years. And this transformation poses 4 global business challenges. The first challenges address the issue of innovation. As we know, the product life cycles of traditional cars was relatively slow, and the innovation over the years ended up being more incremental. But nowadays, the EV revolution is driving innovation at a fastest pace ever. And the question that faces many business leaders is how to catch up, and when they are in the lead, how to lead this innovation race. The second problem is that of scale. This is a problem that is very difficult to really understand well, because the scale of the EV industries, the automotive industry, is so large that it requires collaboration between many companies, all the way from mining to making batteries, to manufacturing cars and distributing them and recharging them. And to achieve that at very large scale requires a creation of new relationships and new business networks, but also requires the processing of an humongous amount of materials and the deployment of innovations at a scale that is unheard of. How and where to partner, and how and where to produce the various components that goes into the new EV automotive industry is one of the biggest challenges facing companies. The third issue is how to decrease cost profitably. And that may seem like an oxymoron, but the fact is that EVs are today still too expensive, out of reach for most of the people. And therefore, the transition from internal combustion engine to EVs requires a reduction in the cost of batteries. And this reduction must be done in such a way that the companies supplying the EVs and the batteries must remain in business and therefore must continue to achieve profitability. The last and not the least is to deal with climate change. In many parts of the world, if not all parts of the world, the governments have enacted regulations to reduce carbon footprint. These regulations are mandatory, and they take place in a stringent fashion over the next decade. in order to preserve the ability to change the course of the current climate crisis. Reducing carbon footprint is especially important in the case of EVs because manufacturing batteries is an energy-intensive business that from mining to making the batteries to deploying the batteries in cars to recharging those cars requires an attention at the complete lifespan of the product from the origin in the mines all the way to the recycling at the end of life. Now, the biggest challenge of all is not any of the four global challenges that I've just spelled out. The biggest challenge is to do all four at the same time. It's very difficult for any business to tackle any one of these items. It's incredibly difficult to do it globally, to do it fast, and to do it responsibly. And it's my privilege now to then introduce our speakers for today. Our first speaker is Alexei Andreev, founder and managing partner at Autotech Ventures. Alexei has also an international life and career, having earned a PhD in solid-state physics in Moscow many decades ago, then later on moved to United States, where he was a managing partner at Harris & Harris, and then ended up founding Autotech Ventures. Alexei has a broad range of expertise, ranging all the way from material science and physics. He's one of the founders and key investors, for example, of IEVE in quantum mechanics computing, all the way to software and the way software transformed the automotive industry today. So we are pleased to give the first speech today to Alexei. The next two speakers I will introduce briefly now and later will provide a longer introduction. We will hear also from Jason Hartlove, CEO of Nanosys. Nanosys being the leader in quantum dots, a new form of technology that has its roots in quantum physics and allows displays to provide what's called today QLED, which is the new generation of large TVs and displays used around the world. Jason has managed this company, Nanosys, for more than 15 years. And now Nanosys is the market leader with more than 95% market share around the world. Jason actually lived for several years in Korea and now is in Silicon Valley. And finally, we'll hear also about the life and the current business focus of Fabrice Houdry. Fabrice is the Chief Commercial Officer of 1D Battery Sciences. Fabrice was born and raised in France, has a background in engineering before moving to the United States, and worked for 7 years for Samsung SDI, where during that tenure, he was heading up the energy storage in North America for Samsung, which business he grew from scratch to become the #1 energy storage business in North America. Nowadays, Fabrice works for 1D Battery Sciences, and he will explain how the technology and innovation of 1D Battery Science can be deployed across an ecosystem that is both global and fits the localized supply chain. What these three gentlemen have in common is that all of three of them have a technical background, ended up in Silicon Valley, but through various routes, i.e. different part of the world, and have in the process brought to innovation their international experiences. So with this introduction, I would like to first pass the microphone to Alexei Andreev, who will talk to us from material to software, the transformation of the automotive sector. Thank you.
Vincent, thank you.
감사합니다. 다시 한번 소개 말씀해 주신 빈센트 플루비리지 박사님 감사합니다. 안녕하십니까? 한국에 계신 여러분들 다시 한번 인사드립니다. 그러면 발표 자료를 공유해 보도록 하겠습니다. 잠시만요.
Okay.
네, 발표 자료 보이시나요? 네, 잘 보입니다. 네, 발표 자료.
So as Vincent mentioned, my name is Alexei Andreev. I'm one of the co-founders of Autotech Ventures. And I will try to bring VC perspectives on electrification and how we see the world and where we invest, and I'll try to explain why. But before I start, I'll tell about Autotech Ventures in a couple of slides. And we are a venture capital firm which was born in 2015. And many years ago, I was actually an early investor in Nanosys, Jason's company. But after leaving my previous firm, myself and my partner, we decided to start a new financial institution, Autotech Ventures, focusing specifically on next generation ground transportation. We're currently investing out of our Fund 3 and have about $400 million under management. We invest across the entire life cycle of a vehicle. And so on one hand, I'm here to discuss electrification and what's happening in battery and relevant spaces. On the other hand, we invest through the entire life cycle of a vehicle. How people choose the vehicles, how they purchase the vehicles, how they finance the vehicles, how they insure the vehicles, how vehicles are moving passengers and cargo along the road, how those vehicles interact with smart cities, how the vehicles are built, how they repaired, recycled, and eventually disposed. And so we have a very transportation and mobility focused view of the world. And so electrification is just a part of what we do as venture capitalists. And for those of you who don't know, our goal as venture capitalists, we have one goal. We are essentially fund managers. And so people are giving us money so we can make more money for our investors. And therefore, every time we make our decisions, those decisions are driven by what's the best way to deploy capital, how much we can make and what multiple we can make on a particular dollar invested. And so while we're very sensitive to many topics raised by Vincent, our perspectives are slightly different. We're here to make money. And therefore, my perspectives and the learnings will be colored by this particular requirement of our existence. In order to raise the next fund, we need to demonstrate superior returns on the previous fund. Otherwise, we'll not get our next fund off the ground. In any case, we've been lucky, and as you can see, we were investing across multiple domains of this transportation ecosystem, with about 1/4 of our portfolio being vertical SaaS companies, solving particular problems of ground transportation and mobility. We have about 1/4 of our portfolio in marketplaces as enabling business model, marketplaces as the way to connect supply and demand, and make sure underutilized assets are properly utilized. About 1/4 of our portfolio is in deep tech. And so in deep tech, we touch semiconductors, we invest in algorithmic innovations, we invest in pretty much energy related stuff, but it's also only 1/4 of our portfolio. And a growing part of our portfolio is something I call SaaS-enabled fintech. And so innovations where you use your software and big data to learn something, and then instead of just charging for software and just charging for big data, you turn around and you start providing financial instruments to the end customers. You know who is a good driver, who is a bad driver, and you price insurance accordingly. You know who is a profitable trucking company and who is a profitable trucker and who is not profitable trucker. And you provide loans to trucking companies. You do loans to underbanked community, you build neobanks, you launch insurance companies which can build their own model, calculate their own risks, and provide better services to the end customers. And so this is what we do. As I said, we got lucky, and our portfolio between two funds generated 6 unicorns. And the unicorn, as you probably know, refers to companies which exceeded $1 billion in market value. We had 5 IPOs in our portfolio, and we sold companies, including one to Tesla and one to Apple, and 2 other acquisitions, Kazoo and Nasper, some more kind of automotive retail related. We lead rounds, we price rounds, we take board seats, we're an active investor, we invest domestically and internationally. And so if you look at our electrification portfolio, what you will notice is the following. So on one hand, I'm condensed matter physicist by training, and previously I invested in a number of battery-related companies. And so a company called Nanogram Devices was acquired by Wilson Greatbatch. A battery company called Contour Energy, spin-off from Caltech, was acquired by Schlumberger. We were early investors from my previous firm in Nanosys, and now 1D Material is essentially a spin-off from Nanosys, commercializing fundamental technology developed by Alex Zettel, but for the purpose of battery and energy storage. And so before we started Autotech Ventures, I had a significant exposure to the battery space. Nevertheless, what you see in our portfolio today are companies focused on use of technologies, use of the new electrochemistry, not the electrochemistry itself. And so one of them is voltage charging, which went public. And we co-invested in this company. We're early investor in this company, and we co-invested with SK Group. I wonder if somebody from SK Group is in the audience. We had a number of other very good large corporations, from General Electric to Schneider. And what the company did, they introduced free electric charging, subsidized by outdoor advertising. And so for electric vehicles, instead of collecting money while you're charging, they would install large outdoor advertising billboards, and they would collect money from packaged consumer goods and advertising dollars as a main source of revenues. Our next company is called Viorite, and it's like Gogoro or any other micromobility player in your domain. Again, company called Viorite, profitably building the network of small electric vehicles. They're growing in US. They are competing with much larger companies. They have a unique business model. They have exclusive access to very fast production facilities in China, and they charge as any other micromobility company per ride. But they do a lot of customization, and they have really smart battery management systems, and they have swappable batteries, easy to service, easy to maintain, easy to replace, reducing cost of operations, increasing productivity of those vehicles. Yet another company in our portfolio is another micromobility company, but this time in Turkey. And as you know, Turkey has about 85 million people, and Turkey issued 2 licenses for electric scooters, and one of them, one of the licenses is owned by Marti, and so Marti is scaling up in Turkey, and unlike many other markets where you have a lot of competition and where you have a lot of kind of race to the bottom, whoever can offer the cheapest scooters win. In a more structured market like Turkey, you can actually grow and grow profitably. And so we're investors in Marti, we're investors in VIA, and we're pretty happy with the results of those 2 deals. Observations. We keep looking outside of those 3 deals. We see over 1,000 potential opportunities per year. And so what we're noticing is, except for Tesla, the car makers have the same playbook. They learn from each other. They don't want to deal with electrochemistry. They don't want to develop new cells. They don't want to contribute anything to their design except for providing specifications and technical requirements. Size, performance, temperature stability, shelf life, etc. Rechargeability. They outsource cell design and manufacturing to tier 2s. And South Korean companies are a global force, as you know, LG, SK, and then there are some Japanese players providing automotive-grade cells, and China is up and coming, but so far, your price and performance in the battery space remains unmatched. Then car makers outsource battery pack design and manufacturing to tier 1s. You have BorgWarner, you have Mahle, you have Johnson Controls. You have a number of existing suppliers to car makers. And today, instead of building their own battery pack assembly lines or designing their own battery packs, they rely on Bosches of the world and Contis of the world to come up with fully integrated battery pack solutions. What car makers try to do, not all of them, and some of them are forward-looking, and they see themselves as technology leaders. Some of them are a little bit more backward, but the technology leading car makers, they try to keep battery management systems in-house. And the same way as car makers tend to be very proud of their internal combustion engines. This is Daimler engine, this is BMW engine, this is Toyota engine, this is Honda engine, this is Hyundai engine. The same pride for having unique engine built and developed in-house is now migrating, or maybe already migrated, to battery management system. They see the battery management system and this controls and ability to squeeze performance out the particular battery pack as the core expertise that will allow them to differentiate in the future and use it as a competitive edge. On the other hand, if you look at the emerging OEMs and Rivians of the world and Lucids of the world and many other emerging EV OEMs, they don't want to touch cells, but they feel pretty comfortable controlling battery pack IP, and in some cases designing their own battery packs, in other cases outsourcing it to third-party developers, but licensing technology in-house and having control from battery pack up. I think established players, it's battery management system and up. In general, hardware is hard. That's why it's called hardware. And batteries are even harder. And if some of you are involved in electrochemistry like Vincent and Jason, you will know it takes a lot of time to develop battery chemistry, scalable, meeting every criteria, including cost and manufacturability at the same time. It's a very risky entertainment, and there are many failed companies who try to innovate fundamentally new technologies in this domain. And even silicon material is only now getting introduced, although the theory between silicon and silicon carbon mixtures, the theory has been around for the last 10, 15 years, but it took that long to identify the right composition of matter, the right morphology, avoid swelling, figure out how to package, manufacture, and mass produce those kind of nanocrystal carbon composites. And so electrochemistry is really challenging. And as Vincent mentioned, battery scale-up is very capital intense. And so unless you can inject existing chemistry or new chemistry into existing manufacturing flow, building a new battery plant, expensive, takes time, takes permits. And once you start producing those new cells, you need to prove end customers that your battery is first satisfying all the criteria, and second, it does not degrade fast, and so you need to do accelerated testing somehow. But if it's a new electrochemistry, then you cannot replace time with temperature over time. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. And so the end customers, specifically car makers, are super conservative, and they're not willing to bet the house on the new chemistry. They want to be aware of the new chemistry, but to say, I will bet my firm like General Motors or Ford on yet to be proven chemistry or Daimler, it's a stretch of imagination. Those guys are conservatives. They want to make sure what they put in the vehicles is bulletproof and it will deliver as advertised. They don't need recalls. And so if you look at 1, 2, and 3, you will notice that venture capital is not a good fit. We have 10-year funds. We need to distribute all the money to our investors in 10 years. And recently, in 2020, 2021, SPACs, or special purpose acquisition companies, became offered VCs a quicker turnaround. We invested in technologies, we built prototypes, but instead of scaling it as a private company, Wall Street helped us as asset managers to find an exit route, to essentially merge private companies with public companies and generate liquidity for venture capitalists within the 10-year time horizon. And many batteries went public in the United States. And Freyr, Microvast, Solid Power, QuantumScape. What you can observe today is most of those stocks dropped significantly in value. Because in the low inflation environment, investors were willing to take bets on science projects. They didn't have any other opportunities to deploy capital. In a high inflationary environment, the appetite for those long time to gestation and risky projects went down significantly. And majority of those companies on the list lost 50, 75, in some cases, up to 90% in the value. And so they're now priced as they should be priced by private markets, not by public markets. Again, is it going to return? Will we see another SPAC wave? I'm not sure, and it's unclear how this SPAC winter will last. However, electrification is a very big theme, and the governments around the world are investing massive amounts of money and we need to solve our carbon emission problem. And electrification of vehicles is one of the major ways to reduce carbon footprint of the humankind. And as Elon Musk demonstrated to us with Tesla, it can be done very, very profitably. And so for us, for Autotech Ventures, we are interested in this domain, but we're coming to this domain from software and big data angle, staying away from electrochemistry for the reasons I explained at the previous slide. And so what we're really interested is to identify and invest in algorithms which can improve charge-discharge profiles, increase battery life, get more out of existing cell, and do it in a smart way. If you wish, be able to address each cell individually, create micro inverters for battery packs, be able to adjust your charge-discharge rates as your batteries are degrading, and do it in a smart way. And there is a little bit of material science in that, but it's mostly machine learning and control algorithms. We are interested by software for bidirectional charging and utility integration. Clearly, with oil prices going up and vehicles getting larger and larger batteries, utilities now see electric vehicles as very valuable, useful load. First, utilities can compete with big oil, like first time in 100 years. As EV adoption grows, EV owners talk to utilities. It's the charging station. Utility is your charging station. Utility is your fueling station. But utilities not only want to sell more electrons and more wattage to the end users, replacing big oil, but they also want to use those vehicles to stabilize the network, to make network more resilient and robust. Can you reduce charging rates during the peak hours? Can you adjust how vehicles are charged to do frequency and load regulations? And they're willing to pay. And so finding this compromise, finding the new business models and find new software and networks to manage things on the intersection of electric vehicles and utilities, that's what we're looking at as we speak. And the next one is even more interesting. If you want to buy a used vehicle, you normally do inspection. And your inspection includes checking the engine and transmission and suspension and everything else. If you imagine the vehicle as an electric vehicle, electric motors don't break. They have pretty much infinite lifetime. And so the part which defines the value is a battery pack. And therefore, we're very interested in new business models which would allow create this database of battery packs and help consumers acquire used electric vehicles and have a very clear understanding of what they're acquiring and how much it should be worth. And so what we're trying to do is let large battery producers stay focused on electrochemistry. I don't think medium or even and small size venture capitalists are well positioned to invest in next generation battery cells. And instead, I expect us venture capitalists to be more focused on battery usage, data analytics, software, and retail of electric vehicles. It's a much better fit to what venture capitalists do, the fact that we need to return funds in 10 years, and we need to demonstrate rapid growth within 2 to 3 years of our initial investment. So thank you. Thank you very much, everybody. Do I have time for any questions, Vincent?
Yes, you do.
Perfect.
While we're getting ready for Jason, I'd like to ask you a specific question. You make a very strong case for the importance of software in the automotive sector, and for the fact that software is less risky from a venture capitalist point of view than electrochemistry. Maybe you can say a few words about the interconnectivity between the two. Specifically, I'm thinking about two aspects. One is the ability to use machine learning and artificial intelligence to iterate much faster on the discovery of better chemical and chemistry for the batteries. And the other one is the ability to leverage the new materials, for example, silicon, in making adaptive battery management system much more efficient than it would be without these new materials.
Yeah, Vincent, I wish I can answer to your questions well. We stay 1 or 2 layers above the battery cells. And so on one hand, we're aware of AI used for rapid exploration and rapid generation of models too difficult for humans or too complex for humans to come up with. And so we sold 2 AI companies, one to Apple and one to Tesla. But in both cases, those AI tools had something to do with autonomous driving, where essentially AI is at the core. AI is something which does perception, AI is something which does cognition, AI is something which does trajectory planning and execution. And so the entire autonomous driving is very tightly built around different AI engines, and we can talk about end-to-end and stack, and if you want to turn it into AI conversation for autonomous piece, I'm totally happy to do so. For the battery discovery, we see AI used for, another domain where we see AI is creation of digital twins for engines, transmissions, particular parts of the vehicle. And the purpose of creating those digital twins is prognostic maintenance and repair. You don't want the vehicle to die in the middle of the road. You want it to be repaired before it even hits the road. And if you know this particular part will disintegrate or will need a replacement in 100 kilometers, so instead of sending the vehicle on the road, you repair it before releasing it. Very important for the fleets, very good ROI, rapidly growing, rapidly expanding domain in fleet management space. I'm aware of AI used for material discovery. I'm aware AI coming with new solutions for Navier-Stokes equations and predicting molecular interactions. But it's something I moved on 7, 8 years ago, and we don't invest that low in the supply chain. It just,
and then
you and me right now.
Yeah, thank you. And then one final question on the business side. The automotive industry is more than 100 years old and developed in many parts of the world, but until Tesla, really not in California. However, nowadays, a lot of innovation comes in the automotive sector from Silicon Valley, things that have to do with LIDAR, that have to do with autonomous driving, that have to do with insurance and so on. So maybe you can say a few words from your perspective. How come Silicon Valley has been so effective in bringing innovation in that sector, despite the fact that essentially there was no history for most of the last 100 years in Silicon Valley in the automotive sector?
Yeah, I can start with a joke, and then maybe I will add something more serious. I think the main factor is our traffic is just very, very bad. And people hate staying in traffic jams, start, stop, 10 kilometers per hour, going to and from the offices every day. You just stay in the traffic and you're saying, why the heck, why nobody comes with autonomous vehicle? And you wait 2 years, you wait 3 years, you wait 5 years. And at some point you realize if you want a change, the change should be coming from you. You cannot just sit and wait on the sidelines. The world will not change. You should become the action. You should become the conductor of this change. And so historically, Silicon Valley, as you know, was built by people who are willing to change and willing to jump and make things happen. And after staying in traffic jams for hours and hours and hours every week, we need to fix it. On a more serious note, I think what's happened is the explosion of different AI techniques and AI toolkit inside Google's and Salesforce's and Facebook's of the world. So the first wave of AI was born inside the internet giants. And Silicon Valley produced enough wealth and sufficient number of really talented engineers and AI domain specialists so that after teaching computers to play chess and beating Anatoly Kasparov and then teaching machine to play Go and beating the world champion at Go and doing some other amazing things with natural language processing. It was just, yeah, we can solve narrow AI problems really well, and we're beating humans. And so let's try to apply this knowledge for automotive, because automotive is the largest or second largest industry in the world. If you look at retail, insurance, financing, and manufacturing, it's in US, we're talking about $4 trillion a year. And so it's a huge market. The technology toolkit was born inside deep tech. We have an urge and need to improve transportation because we don't have any public transportation, unlike South Korea or many other countries around the world. And it's miserable, and state is not going to solve it for us, and federal government is not going to solve it for us. And so out of necessity, I think everything happens out of necessity.
Thank you very much. I would like to thank you very much for your contribution today. And with that, let's applaud Alexei Andreev for his speech and contribution to the forum. Thank you.
And thank you for having me again. It was a pleasure.
And now I would like to introduce Jason Hartlove. And I already gave an introduction. So Jason, the microphone is yours.
Great, thank you, Vincent. Let me just get my slides here ready for sharing. Hopefully, let's see, what are you seeing? Are you seeing the full presentation view or the partial view?
We
are seeing the presenter view.
Okay, hang on. How's that? Better?
Yeah, perfect.
Okay, great. So, good morning, everyone. My name is Jason Hartlove. I'm President and CEO of Nanosys. Thank you, Vincent, and to the 4th Annual SVBF for allowing me to be here today. Vincent asked me to talk a little bit about setting up successful collaborations between Silicon Valley and Korea. This is something I have actually over 20 years of experience doing. As Vincent mentioned, I did live in South Korea, actually from 2005 through 2008, where I was president of Magnachip Semiconductor. I was actually one of the founding executives of Magnachip. I was brought on by Dr. Halla A, the original founding CEO of the company, as we took the system LSI business of Hynix and made a new company out of it. Prior to that, I spent over 17 years with Hewlett Packard and Agilent Technologies, its spin-out, which I joined immediately after university. I have my degree in electrical engineering. And in my time with Hewlett Packard and Agilent, I also ran many successful collaborations with Korean companies. Obviously, in Korea, I learned a lot about Korean culture and Korean business. And then coming to Nanosys 14 years ago, I was able to leverage all of this and build some very successful relationships with some very large Korean companies. And today I hope to tell you a little bit about things that worked for me and hopefully give anyone listening my words of wisdom if I have any. So first, a little bit about Nanosys. As Alexi said earlier, he was an investor in the company early on. We are the world's leading quantum dot supplier. We develop and produce the world's best material across all metrics. We're the innovation leader in these materials. We developed the market, the technology, and the components that you find in over 60 million quantum dot TVs, tablets, monitors, and notebook computers today out there in the world. We created this market through and patented it with over 900 worldwide granted or patent applications currently pending. And we make quantum dots at the largest volume and at the lowest cost, with annual installed production capacity of over 100 tons, which equates to the ability to supply on an annualized basis in excess of 50 million TV-sized displays. And we've developed a tier 1 customer base with every one of the top 10 TV manufacturers today having quantum dot TVs in their portfolio of products they sell, as well as 4 of the top 5 IT makers. And hopefully we'll get that elusive 5th IT device maker next year. So with this success, we have a long history of innovation that dates back to our company founding in 2001, where we exclusively licensed some technology from the University of California, Berkeley and Lawrence Berkeley National Labs, as well as from MIT and a number of other leading research institutes. We brought that technology together and we formed Nanosys, which spent its first roughly 7 years largely in a research mode, trying to find ways to take these novel, really interesting material science discoveries and find commercial applications for them and the ways to bring them to market. Unfortunately, during that time period, the company was largely unsuccessful in this endeavor. I joined in 2008 after returning back to the US after my time in Korea. And I could immediately see that there were some of the technologies we had in the company which really were completely novel. They offered performance that you could not get from any other types of solution that was in either the market at that moment in terms of an incumbent solution or any new materials that were on the horizon for development. And one of those was quantum dots. We successfully developed components based on this technology and launched it in 2013 in the Amazon Kindle Fire as our first product. And since that time, we've achieved many firsts with our technology. We were the first in the world to pass 10 tons shipped, the first to get full EPA certification for our materials, the first to develop heavy metal free quantum dots for mass production, and as we did all of these novel innovations, together with our partners, including Samsung, LG, and many other Korean companies, we have brought over 600 different models of consumer products to consumer and IT products to the world stage, and shipped more than 60 million units to date so far. So our history of innovation actually goes well beyond quantum dots, though. So Nanosys was really founded as a nanotechnology company. And so it had many different nanotechnology IP and know-how within the company. And so when I came in, I could see immediately that some of these were just not going to be possible for us to develop fully into commercialization. For example, we had the world's first charge trap metal nanocrystal NAND flash cell that was ever made. Now, charge trap memory is still something that people are working on developing and bringing to market. But we were the first to develop this technology, but we could only scale it to about 180 nanometer. Now, as most of you probably aware, today's NAND flash cells are well below 10 nanometer in terms of the actual geometry of devices. So we knew we wouldn't be able to scale it, but we thought the technology was possible to be scaled to those levels. And so we licensed this technology to Samsung Semiconductor and eventually sold the technology and the patent portfolio to SanDisk in 2013. As Alexei mentioned, we also had developed the world's first successfully shown silicon nanowire on graphite anode material for high lithiation capacity in lithium-ion batteries. And this technology we spun out to 1D Battery Sciences in 2013. And this is the very successful company today, which I think the next speaker is going to talk about. We developed other key technologies such as the world's first superhydrophobic nano surface coating for surgical instruments that would keep blood and water off the surgical instruments in the operating theater, which we licensed to Bruker, and then eventually to Medtronic in 2012. We have many other innovations, including nanofiber wound dressings, high electron mobility printed transistor arrays using silicon nanowires, the world's highest platinum utilization hydrogen fuel cell catalyst, and many others. So this is our history of innovation. So how did we bring this to form successful partnerships in Korea? Well, first and foremost, I think that by now you've gotten the idea that we're a very innovative company, that I've built a very innovative culture. We're founded on some of the most leading edge innovative thoughts and technologies that have come out of some of the leading research institutes around the world, and we continue to license those in as they are developed. But we also had to develop a real strong ability to partner. And so this is something the company had not really done very successfully when I came on board. It had a few partnerships, but unfortunately they were not very successful. But in my time here, we have developed partnerships across all of the Samsung entities, most of the LG entities, and with many other companies in Korea, such as Kolon, RI Nanotech, Glowtech, Solus, Doosan, SK, Dongwoo Fine Chemical, and many others. These customers, these companies are all customers of ours. They started out as partnerships where we jointly developed things, we took things to them, et cetera, but eventually these all resulted in commercial relationships between our company and theirs. And for Nanosys, this has resulted in over $150 million of revenue from Korea that we've had in the life of our company, actually in the time frame that I've been with the company. But it's resulted in billions of dollars, even tens of billions of dollars of value creation for Korean companies. Samsung Electronics, many of you are very familiar with the quantum dot products of Samsung. We are the company that enabled that technology to happen. And it was through our partnership that Samsung was able to successfully bring their first technology, their first products to market in 2015. And since that time, they've grown the QLED brand. And most recently now, we have the QD display or QD OLED product, which came to market this year. So these are very successful collaborations on both sides. Nanosys benefited, our Korean partners benefited, and ultimately the consumers of these technologies benefited as well in more richer, lifelike viewing experiences from their displays, higher efficiency with those displays, better colors, and many other attributes that just weren't available before we launched quantum dots successfully into the market. So how did we? How did we do this? How did we successfully bring these partnerships together with the innovations that we had developed? Well, there's really, I thought a lot about this, and I thought back to a lot of the things I learned at Hewlett-Packard. Hewlett-Packard, in the early days when I was there in the 80s, had a very strong philosophy around localization. So Hewlett-Packard formed joint ventures in the countries they did business with long before this was en vogue, before anyone else was doing this. So we formed a joint venture in Japan, we formed joint ventures in China and Korea, and these were really successful to adapting to the local ways that business is done, the local relationships that exist. It's impossible to just come into a new place and be able to have the kind of network that you can build if you've gone to school with people, if you know them from university days, if you have these long-standing relationships. And as a company coming from Silicon Valley, of course, we don't have people who have those relationships. So adapting to the local ways was incredibly important. Part of that was putting the local presence in Korea. We've had people, full-time Nanosys employees in Korea since 2009. We've had labs. We currently co-locate with some of our customers. And this type of intimacy really helps us adapt and understand and be able to really get how to do the collaborations successfully. The second thing was understanding the problems from your partner's point of view. And the third thing, we have a saying in the US, teamwork makes the dream work. And so being able to work in this collaborative manner really helped us a lot. So how did we do some of these things? Well, you know, adapting to the local ways, right? So GOSA, that's me. Probably the only Caucasian guy you've ever seen doing the GOSA ceremony. But, you know, this was important for our local people. And that was when I was with Magnachip Semiconductor. And so I learned about this tradition. I learned about, you know, the relationship, you know, that Korea has and the long-standing history that Korea has with North Korea. And it was very interesting to me because I actually have an uncle on my father's side who died in the Korean War. But the story that I knew about the Korean War was very different than the story that I learned from the local Korean perspective. So I went to all the monuments there. I understood better about the history of that conflict. And there are multiple sides to it and how it affected the Korean people. And of course, the food. I love the food. But you have to adapt to these things. You have to really understand how they affect the thinking of people and how that's different than perhaps what we have here in Silicon Valley, which is really a very big melting pot of culture. We have people, you know, from all over the world. We all come together, we all mix and we all blend. And so, you know, it's harder for us to know each other's stories here, but in Korea, it's very important to know these stories and understand them. Second thing that was, really important ultimately to making these partnerships work, it was building on that foundation of understanding, was really understanding the problem from our partner's point of view. So as Alexi said, electrochemistry is hard. And I have an entire company full of people, maybe they don't look exactly like this guy, but I have an entire company full of people who basically love to work in the lab on this type of problem. But at the end of the day, our customers don't really care about what they do. They care about how it's going to perform in their particular devices. And so we had to develop ways to bring our quantum dots into a relevant form that the customers could be able to use. And for battery materials, of course, this is exactly the same. I'm sure that Vincent and his colleagues can tell you stories on end about, how we have this great performance with the silicon nanowire materials on graphite, and yet it can't be calendared properly, or there's so many integration issues with these new materials that you have to deal with. So understanding those problems means we had to become maybe not experts, but at least really familiar with our customers and with the way they put their products together. We tried various different things. We tried to encapsulate our quantum dots in glass. We tried all of these different form factors, and ultimately we were able to bring out a way of putting quantum dots into extruded plastic, which just this year was introduced and won the display industry's, one of the display industry's largest awards, which is the Component of the Year award. That was just announced today. And that's the third time we've won such an honor for the innovative technologies that we've brought to market for our quantum dots. But again, we couldn't do these things unless we knew not just how to make our chemistry work and how to make quantum dots work, but actually how to do the integration into our customers' forum. And last but not least, of course, as we say, teamwork makes the dream work. And so, there's been a lot of time that I've spent with my Korean partners, colleagues, and I say friends, getting to know them, both in the work environment and outside the work environment. And this has built a very strong amount of trust. So now when Samsung launches new products, I'm actually invited to go on stage at their events and give talks. We are called upon not just as a trusted partner to supply materials to them, but as an authority for the press, for scientific publications and joint collaborations to develop new products and new materials and be able to really help them in their mission of bringing the best viewing experiences to customers around the world. So it's a lot to condense into just a short talk, but that's all the time that I have today. I hope that these points were salient or meaningful for you, and that you enjoyed my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jason. In the interest of time, I will ask you just one question. You have explained to us all what you learned to do business in Korea and how hard it was and how successful you became. Now, reversing that question, what do you think is the hardest thing for Korean businesses to learn about Silicon Valley, to do business effectively in Silicon Valley? What's difficult coming from Korea into Silicon Valley?
That's a great question. I've seen some companies do this better than others. And so I think that my answer is going to be based on kind of the companies that have done well. And they have almost done the exact same thing in reverse. So understanding Silicon Valley companies is really important. And so I have, as investors in my company, several large Korean shareholders. It's a matter of public record that both LG and Samsung are investors in Nanosys. When I look at companies that have been successful, though, in large scale investing in Silicon Valley startup companies, they have taken an approach to look more like a venture capital organization. So they have created a VC arm that really behaves and looks like a VC. It doesn't look like an extension of a Korean outpost. They are measured in the same kind of metrics, ROI on assets, et cetera. They have 10-year lives of funds. They really have taken on the same mentality. And this has allowed them to be significant partners to a lot of startup companies here in the Valley, get an idea about what's going on with the technology, et cetera. And so that's just an example. Not everybody is going to set up a venture investing arm here in Silicon Valley, but it allows them to get to know the nature of startup companies, which is very different than 100-year-old Korean companies. Startup company wants to go fast, break things, fix them, be very, very agile. Doesn't necessarily follow a lot of process, may not even have process discipline, but innovation is key. And I think understanding that can really help build partnerships and success for Korean companies coming to Silicon Valley.
Thank you very much. Let's give a round of applause to Jason for his contribution today.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. And then last but not least, I would like to pass the microphone to Fabrice Houdry, Chief Commercial Officer of 1D Battery Science, who has himself a deep experience in working with Korean companies. Fabrice, the microphone is yours.
Thank you, Vincent. Just wanting to make sure that everybody can see my screen in a proper presentation mode.
Right.
Okay,
No
great.
problem.
Great. Excellent. Well, good morning, everybody, and it's really a privilege for me to be with you remotely today from an extension of the Silicon Valley, as I am actually sitting further north, closer to Vancouver. I work from Seattle, even though I do travel a lot to 1D head office in Palo Alto in the Silicon Valley. I learned a lot just from the previous two speakers, I must say. And as I was looking at the pictures that were put on the screen just prior to me, it reminded me of all the great memories I have had with during my time at Samsung SDI in Korea. And indeed, what was shared before me by Jason is really an essential part of the success, which I hope to share with you today as well. So Vincent already made an introduction for me, so I'm not going to go back through everything, but I would just like to state that prior to joining 1D, actually exactly a year ago, it was a year ago that I met with many of you and participated to the SVBF for the first time in my case. And now a year later, it's my pleasure to share with you some of the updates and the lessons that I have learned since then. But prior to joining 1D, I spent indeed 7+ years working for Samsung SDI in charge of the company's stationary energy storage business in America, and also working with customers in that are the pioneers in the electric vehicle lithium-ion battery space. During my time at Samsung SDI, I learned a tremendous deal of insights and understanding of the company culture, but also about the tremendous and immediate opportunities and challenges of silicon anodes into the battery. And when I had the chance there to explore the various silicon solutions that were available today in large companies or small companies, I did recognize that 1D synanode, which is those silicon nanowires, which we will be discussing today, was really, in my view, an extraordinary innovation that was ready for prime-time commercialization at scale and actually lowering the cost. So this is when I decided to join 1D and help make this happen. Essentially tackling the very electrochemistry innovations challenges that Alexei before me was referring to, because it is and it will be essential to enabling the EV transformation. Above and beyond, and I would say synergistically with software, big data, AI, mentioned by Alexei. As Jason emphasized, relationships, adaptation, collaboration within our partnerships built around the world, and in particular in Korea, are really the essential part of successfully bringing such electrochemical innovation to the largest material suppliers and battery makers of the world. We saw with Nanosys that they were very successful in adapting and overcoming these challenges. And we understand that their early investors, venture capitalists, backers, etc., have been quite rewarded for their foresight, for their courage, their tenacity, with immense value creation for all. And this is why I want to explain to all how 1D, we are adapting to our partners with silicon simplified. And the word simplified, I hope you will understand, carries a lot of meaning. Let me see how I can move to the next slide here. There we go. So as you can see on this slide, worldwide experts agree that the EV and battery supply chain is and will remain grossly unbalanced. And I use a big word here to just express, I don't really have words actually to express how the demand is going to overweigh the offer, at least until 2030 and probably beyond. As such, the stakes have rarely and perhaps never been higher in any industry that we have known to date. I think Vincent made a reference to this. Short term, between now and 2025, really only those EV makers and battery makers who will have anticipated this situation by taking the necessary investments risks early enough will be able to deliver, truly deliver on their EV promises to their customer, like how much capacity they will have available. Others may not succeed. For the midterm between 2025 and 2030, we see that there is right there a $6 trillion EV market. This market will even further accentuate the challenge that I just mentioned, whereby only those EV makers and battery makers who will be ready for a substantial competitiveness step from the Teslas of this world and from various geographies will be able to survive. And we can see the impact where just 1% market share change for an EV OEM will translate into $60 billion of revenue or $6 billion of profit, which is really related to the stake I mentioned a bit earlier. Finally, for the long term, in the early 2030s, the $9 trillion EV market will be for grab by those who will have survived and who will have won the short-term and mid-term positioning I was referring earlier. So in these extremely challenging times, the key takeaways that I would like to share with all on this, on innovation in particular, is innovation is essential to enable the winners with a differentiated offer, but innovation must first and foremost help to solve the problems of the supply chain or the supply chain challenges we are talking about. And at the same time, innovation must be extremely simple to integrate in the existing supply chain. This is really, in my view and with my experience, how Silicon Valley, Korea battery and EV supply chain and our partners around the world can be successful. This is what we are doing at 1D for our partners, and this is why our solution, our platform, Synanode, is oftentimes dubbed Silicon Simplified. On my slide here is not advancing. Just allow me just 1 second here. Next. Okay, great. Over the last 10 plus years, actually 10 plus years, the team at 1D has anticipated for this moment, optimizing and perfecting its silicon nanowire technology platform to address those key enablers for success. Performance, as you can see with this energy density number here, the silicon integrated solution allow the full capacity of the silicon to be used, and it makes it a much more efficient solution than other silicon solution in the anode. The costs that can be either saved or the savings can be made are tremendous, and using silicon nanowires, it really helps lowering the cost of EV gigafactories by $1 billion savings or more. And finally, when it comes to scalability, this really is the critical cornerstone of why this is enabling the supply chain that exists today, because Synanode is not a solution that gets created with new material. It's actually silicon nanowires grown and fused on existing graphite that graphite material suppliers, EV battery makers, and EV makers in the end are using already at scale today. And then last but not least, the importance for any innovation to be adopted at large commercial scale is that its intellectual property, patent portfolio, freedom to operate is very, very safe and very well guarded. Hopefully you can see this picture here. It's really zoomed in pictures of what Synanode is all about. You can see the silicon nanowires fused onto graphite, and I should say onto and inside graphite particles, providing a very low surface area, which you want to avoid the concerns that everybody knows about silicon, about expansion and contraction. With Synanode, the surface area is actually reduced, really addressing this concern. Those silicon nanowires are electrically connected and are deployed on the graphite without inactive material. So with this one picture here, I hope everybody can understand why Synanode is the only technology that can be just almost as a drop-in technology into the current EV battery supply chain. It's not just a technology, it's really all about the business model that that startups like 1D are focusing on. The essence of 1D's business model is that it does not attempt to displace existing suppliers or to dictate or impose how a battery cell is made, but instead to leverage the entire existing supply chain and help bridge this gap between supply and demand that I mentioned a bit earlier. Synanode is obviously a silicone on graphite, as I mentioned, but not just. Synanode is a technology platform that really allows a system-level approach that our EV battery maker or EV OEM partners need end-to-end system consideration. And that ranges from production technologies such as material surface treatments that will optimize the range, life cycle of the battery versus cost versus energy density. It also involves anodes, anode electrode optimization, such as the dry electrode coating, which I mentioned a bit earlier, or multi-layer anode to achieve different kind of performances. And finally, all the way to the cell level, where we provide know-how and IP for reference electrode, which is really the linchpin between what was discussed earlier about battery management systems, software, and the very specific technology inside the cell to optimize both. In each of these examples, we have 1D as unique IP, and I think that's quite essential to make this possible to be scaled and deployed commercially. The system level approach that we were describing a minute ago here, let me just move here something, is possible, and the scaling up is possible because our manufacturing process has been designed by using existing precursors. So as you can see, it all starts with the EV grade graphite already at large scale production everywhere around the world and planning to grow tremendously more in the years to come, as you know. And our manufacturing process is such that we simply use this graphite, commercially available silane at very large scale in the various places in the world. And again, using equipment, CVD processing equipment system, also commercially available from the solar industry. As you know, this is a very standard piece of equipment here. To essentially grow and fuse those silicon nanowires onto the graphite, providing in return an enhanced graphite, an improved graphite, which really reduces the cost, reduces the material consumption of graphite and other materials in the battery cells and the EV supply chain overall. And this is really the key point I mentioned at the beginning, how this innovation, Synanode innovation, actually helps reduce the supply chain constraints that we are faced with today. Oh, I forgot to mention, obviously, you saw on the previous slide, the cost aspect. Needless to say that it all starts with ensuring that whatever innovation we bring is not going to call for premium cost, but actually is going to address the immense cost reduction that is needed throughout the EV supply chain for the future to truly enable the full EV market. Since last year, there's been a lot of work being done at 1D in terms of industrialization, dedicated pilot programs, large-scale production plant. That's really how we go. And you can see here a picture rendering of this first industrialization step we are doing in Washington State, here in America, near Moses Lake, close to a silane, large source of silane production, to put Sinanode at scale. We're doing this around the world, but we are obviously doing it starting in America. And you can see a few key success and recent accomplishments that essentially demonstrate that this is not just theory, but really that this technology innovation is ready to be deployed in large commercial deployment and at scale. You can see here it's a rendering, it's actually a picture of the prototype large EV cell format that we've been working on. Many of you will recognize this battery, 4680 or 4690 in this case, as being
Fabrice, you didn't click on the slides.
Oh, I apologize. Thank you. I'm navigating. Sorry about this. Thanks. Many of you recognize here this 4680, 4690 cell as being the typical model that Tesla has designed and in terms of innovation has asked its partners to manufacture for them. Well, at 1D, we have partnered with a battery cell maker and have experienced with them how to put Sinanode, silicon nanowires on graphite into a battery that would achieve the specifications that were contemplated. And we're happy to share that this cell is now built and is cycling. And this is very exciting to show how simple it is to put Sinanode in such battery format. Similarly, in our pilot plant in Moses Lake, which I mentioned, you can see the machineries there that we have ordered and that we are about to receive actually next month on site for installation are again those standard CVD equipment that can be easily manufactured at scale and at very low cost. Still practically showing what a pilot plant would look like, you can see a rendering here of a very small scale, a very small size. It doesn't need to be very big in order to use existing equipment to manufacture large capacity. This machine that you see here, a single machine, can generate up to 100 tons of graphite being processed with silicon nanowires, which correspond per year to approximately 340 megawatt hour of battery material, and can serve several thousands of electric vehicles for battery optimization and battery qualification. We are starting the production this year, and I'm sharing with you on the next slide here what our timelines for industrialization and scale up look like. And this is something we're doing in every continent, key continent, Asia, America, and Europe. The one that is the most advanced is the one in America, as I mentioned, in Moses Lake, this pilot line that you see. I just give you here an idea of the timeline and how our EV partners are going to optimize and qualify their batteries to be on the road with those battery and Sinanode inside by 2025. In parallel, we are building large-scale production plant, and our customers have really dictated kind of where the capacity of those plants needed to be. And what we hear and what we're scaling up for is a need between 500,000 electric vehicle to 2 million electric vehicle per year. And this is very doable, again, with a plant that is not very capital intensive and much smaller than what I was used to when I was working with Samsung SDI for a full battery plant. This is very doable. It would still take, obviously, a year and a half, 2 years, depending on the region we build this plant in. That is why we are doing a capital raise right now with companies that have the ambition to build that scale with us. And all of these towards enabling large-scale production of those quantities I am showing here by 2025 or late 2024. I was mentioning that we are doing this around the world, and I'm just highlighting here a few of the regions where we are doing the most progress. Obviously, in America, after our pilot line, the natural next step is to have the large-scale production plant there to serve our American partners. In Asia, we have very close affinities with Korea. So we have several partners who have evaluated our technology and are currently planning for pilot lines in Korea. So we are looking for that next step. We have already created a 1D Synanode entity in China, where we have incorporated in Yulin, very close to the largest silane producer. And we have an engineering and construction partner in the name of Fluor, who is used to build large-scale silane plant around the world, that is partnering with us to build those large-scale production plant. And then the natural next step is for us to do the same thing in Europe. I know I'm running a little bit against the clock here, so I'm going to just finish quickly with a couple of slides to emphasize that the successful large-scale deployment I just mentioned is really essential to be backed and supported around the world with intellectual property and freedom to operate. Whoever is partnering with 1D today, whether they are battery maker, material suppliers, or EV makers, they cannot be concerned about this innovation, as attractive as it may be in terms of cost, in terms of the easy simplicity to drop into their existing supply chain. Their business investment relies on a very strong freedom to operate and patent portfolio. And this is what has perhaps struck me the most when I joined 1D, was the strength of their innovation portfolio that they have built and consolidated over the years. I am convinced that this is in terms of silicon in the anode and beyond, as you can see on this slide, I am convinced this is the strongest portfolio in the industry today. And as you can see on this last slide here, this shows how this portfolio is really taking its full breadth around the world, not just in one country or the other, but really to protect the investments of our partners wherever they want to operate. With that,
thank you very much.
I am closing my presentation, and if you have any questions, please feel free to ask.
Thank you very much, Fabrice. Eugene, how are we doing on time right now?
I think you've hit the time very well. We're a little bit behind. Otherwise, if we can go forward, that would be best. Do you mind? Are there questions that have been addressed to you, Vincent?
Let me see that in the chat. No, I do not see any new questions.
Okay.
So maybe in the interest of time, we want to thank Fabrice for his presentation and give him a round of applause.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was a fantastically informative session. Actually, while we have our three guests still on the line, I hope, there is one question that I wanted to ask, and that is, there are serious issues being brought to everyone around the world in terms of the supply chain. And we understand that the supply chains all over the world is being disrupted by the pandemic, as well as the problems between the war in Ukraine, between Russia and Ukraine. So I'm wondering, against this backdrop, and with all this inflation going on, how does that affect the supply chain for everyone in your industries? Maybe we could start with Alexei first. Hello, Alexei, are you with us? Okay, perhaps with Jason.
Sorry, I was on mute.
Oh,
I was
okay.
talking to myself.
Okay, sure.
My
Alexei?
apologies. Yeah, supply chain is a very, very serious problem. And it covers pretty much everything from semiconductors. I think it's the most acute pain today on the market, all the way to, let's call it commodities. And commodities are getting hit and semiconductors are getting hit. I think one of it's tough, it's difficult. Startups are paying twice, 3 times of what they used to pay just 2 years ago for pretty much everything. And you have significant delays and contract manufacturers are pushing you out, and it's just serious. I think the bright side or the bright light is US started investing heavily in semiconductor buildup. I think it's the most acute shortage today. And we see US government deploying federal funds, and we see large corporations from TSMC to Samsung jacking up their efforts to build additional semiconductor facilities in the country. And I think after 2 or 3 years, the situation will stabilize. Another factor, kind of promising factor, is US government is now focused on Russia, Ukraine. And one of the reasons we face semiconductor shortage is because US Department of Justice was issuing restrictions on Chinese companies, restricting them from access to US technologies. And because nobody knew who was going to be next on the list, Chinese enterprises were storing semiconductors. And the joke in the United States is semiconductors is the next toilet paper. And so people run and purchased as much as they could get from the manufacturers. And I think everyone has significant reserves of semis on the shelves. And it looks like semiconductor is normalizing a little bit. But you still have, again, shortage of all types of commodities. You have shortage of resin. You have shortage of alloys. You have shortage of grain, and food prices will go up. I think it's a challenge. And I think next 3, 4, 5 years are going to be pretty bumpy for the entire humankind. So it's not a regional problem. I think it's a global instability we have to live through.
Thank you very much.
And I wish I had a better answer for you.
Oh, no, that was great. And I understand Jason is offline. So I wonder, either Vincent and or Fabrice, if you could just give us your views about the seriousness of the inflation and the supply chain that we face.
Well, I think it's serious. I would say that for 1D, it has been beneficial. And the reason is, up to a couple of years ago, most of the car makers were happy to purchase batteries and other equipment overseas. But between coronavirus and Ukraine, the tendency now is to make huge investment in each of the 3 regions in order to be lessening the dependency on the other regions. And that fits exactly our technology and our business model. So we find ourselves at the right time, at the right place, given the problem that people are facing. That's most interesting. Fabrice?
No, I couldn't agree more with both Vincent and Alexei. I think I hit on that point at the beginning of my presentation. I think there is tremendous amount of innovation in Korea and in the Silicon Valley as well. And what's most important is to focus, for all of us, to focus on innovations that actually are going to solve or participate in solving those supply chain problems, whether it means consuming less, being more local to consume greener energy that is readily available locally, That's what we are doing at 1D, reducing the graphite consumption, reducing the material used throughout the battery supply chain. So let's focus together on those type of innovation and address this challenge.
Okay, thank you very much. So I understand that it's going to be very bumpy for the next 3 to 5 years, but there are great opportunities. So let's innovate and work hard. Thank you very much. With that, I want to move on to our next session, and this is going to be called Data-Driven Mobility, a huge step towards the promise of zero accidents. So that's a very big promise and a very interesting topic indeed. This is going to be chaired by Dr. Mohsen Moazzami, and Mohsen is the founder and managing partner at IEVE Capital. He started as an engineer out of Stanford University, and he's been involved on the operations side as well as most recently on the fund management side. I think he's going to share his views as well as those of the keynote speakers and panel discussions that we will have. Just one word, here in Korea we didn't have very good video and audio at times. It's because we were making some changes here, but my understanding is that globally on Zoom, everything went smoothly, so thank goodness for that. With that, I want to hand over to Mohsen. Mohsen, are you there?
Yes, thank you very much. Can everybody see and hear me?
We can see and hear you very well.
Greetings to all of you from Silicon Valley, and I'm grateful for the invitation. It's an honor and a pleasure to be with this distinguished group of people from all over the world. So, I have been privileged to kind of fall by default in this part of the world, which is we generically refer to as Silicon Valley, 35 plus years ago. And post my education at Stanford, which was engineering, I have done, pretty much the whole life cycle of, a typical Stanford engineer. I started a company, grew it for about 8.5 years, got acquired by what is today known as Accenture, and then was a partner at Accenture for 4 years before getting recruited in the 90s to a company called Cisco, which later became Rocket Ship. And then I was hoping to stay there for 3 years. I ended up staying 12. And the first 8 years was corporate headquarters in various roles, but the last 4 of my 12 years was as the head of emerging markets, which was looking after a bunch of the growth markets, 132 countries, $6 billion P&L, and about 4,000 teammates from India to Russia, Middle East, Eastern Europe, Turkey, Africa, and all the way to Latin America. And I think that's where I learned really that smart people are everywhere. Innovation is not unipolar, it's multipolar. Innovation takes place everywhere. And, again, smart people invent and create opportunities for all of us globally. And I am really a big fan of that. But for good or for bad, ultimately, a lot of these roads end up in Silicon Valley because it's just a cluster of money and key decision makers around technology. And, a lot of the large companies ranging from, again, Cisco, Intel, Google, Facebook, Apple, and everyone else are headquartered here. Not that, we don't have amazingly global and big, important companies like Samsung and LG in Korea and many others. But again, a lot seems to be happening in this 25 square miles. And nowadays, we wake up every morning to CNBC or Bloomberg or your local version of CNBC, and we hear words like stagflation, inflation, concerns, are we entering a recession, and so on. Let me assure you, as somebody who's old, one of the only advantages of being old is you've seen all the movies before. Innovation will always continue. Amazing companies such as Airbnb, such as Google, such as Uber, were all invented and created in downturns and recessions. And the topic we're talking about today, about mobility, electrification of vehicles and so on, is here to stay for us for many, many cycles and many, many decades ahead. So the only macro level thing I want to just stress, of course, we all have to have the valuation discipline as an investor. We never should not be in a position to overpay for any given asset, but assuming valuation discipline, innovation will not stop. None of us is going to settle down for a slower internet. None of us, we're going to settle for less intelligent cars and everything else from technology and innovation that touches our life. Now let's zero in as a segue into our distinguished keynote speakers about basically mobility and the future of mobility. So the future of mobility is being fueled by three key technology-driven disruptive trends. One, electrification of the vehicles. Two, connected and autonomous vehicles. And finally, mobility as a service. Again, mobility as a service, where things like car ownership, basics that we grew up on, car ownership, may be under disruption. And these three vectors in combination will drive unprecedented change. And I assure you what people forecast and people are working on, and we see it every single day, every single week, not only here in Silicon Valley, but I'm sure you see it in Korea and elsewhere. All of these advances are set to replace our current vehicle-centric system with a radically more efficient, data-enabled, driverless ecosystem with consumers, you and I, at its heart. Users would be able to seamlessly transition between public, private, on-demand, and scheduled modes of transport with dynamic travel information enabling sort of mid-journey changes from mode to mode. And this entire ecosystem is forecasted to be north of $1 trillion by 2030. 2030 is only 8 years away, ladies and gentlemen. What an amazing opportunity lays ahead for all of us. Hopefully, assuming we're healthy and alive, a great future lies ahead, irrespective of what you hear these days at CNBC every morning. So that's a great segue to our keynote speakers. I am delighted to have two fantastic speakers representing exactly the core of what I just told you about the three mega trends in mobility. Ramin Shirani is the founder and CEO of Ethernovia. He has a storied background. His first two companies have gone exited, have gone public, been acquired post going public. So this young man has seen it all, and he's the founder of Ethernovia, where he is addressing the issue around connected cars and in vehicle and communications. The follow-on speaker is a man with a storied career in the United States military in various functions and roles. He heads all of our federal efforts at another portfolio company called Neural Propulsion Systems, or NPS, or NPS.ai for short. And he and the team are addressing the issue around autonomy and the desire and the ambition of zero accidents. And he's addressing it through a multi-sensor, LiDAR, radar, everything else capability that can see through every kind of weather condition, and also has both military as well as commercial applications. So first, we're going to hear from Ramin Shirani of Ethernovia. The microphone is yours, and thank you for your patience and interest.
Thank you very much for the introduction, Mohsen. And, thank you for calling me a young man. I feel, I guess, I've been around long enough that I've seen, all the good and bad and strengths of Silicon Valley. As a kind of an introduction to myself, I graduated from University of California, San Diego back in late 80s. And as a young engineer, I joined National Semiconductor. And luckily, right, it wasn't really by design, but luckily I stumbled on Ethernet, which happened to be kind of paving the rest of the 30 years of my career, even up to now. And National went on to be, early on, to be very successful in proliferation of Ethernet. And I enjoyed the ride. I led a number of programs. And after 10 years at National, I decided as I was truly young back then, not anymore, but as a 28-year-old engineer, I started my first startup company. That's what you do in Silicon Valley, right? I mean, if you work in a number of companies, and then if you have the patience and if you have the drive and if you're ready to work 16-hour days, then you start a company. So I started with a few of my colleagues, some of which are still with me in this existing company. So believe it or not, we've been together for like 30 years. And the company was called Enable Semiconductor, and we did Ethernet for data center, for Cisco 3Com back then, and was successfully sold to Lucent Microelectronics. Stayed there, enjoyed the Bell Lab, research, so on and so forth, and then left to do yet another company called Aquantia. And Aquantia was focused on next generation Ethernet for data centers for the likes of, Apple, Cisco, Intel. And took a long while. We hit subprime, unfortunately, in 2008-9. The company survived, and, we saw the ups and downs of, the venture capital. But eventually the company went IPO in November 2017 in New York Stock Exchange, and was very proud to be there ringing the bell and, enjoying the whole process. At Aquantia, we were working on automotive products. And it was clear to me and some of my other colleagues that if you really want to do an successful automotive company, you need a company that is entirely focused, right? You can't be in a company that's, the priority one would be Cisco or Intel. It really has to be, focused on OEMs and tier ones. So we formed Eternovia in April 2018, and we've grown it well so far. We've raised good money. There's no lack of interest in venture capital in this area of connected car. And we have, our primary target is, submicron, CMOS chips, ICs, at various levels to provide the connectedness of the car. And I'll go through that with a lot of detail for you guys in a few minutes. And, we've grown locally here. I'm in San Jose, California, but you have teams in Netherlands, Australia, Canada, and now in India. And the reason for that is we go where the talent is. We're not hung up on building the team here or there. And honestly, COVID kind of proved to all of us that you can work remotely, and the discipline of multi-location team and making it productive exists. And we've set out to do it, and it helped us actually quite a bit in the COVID time. We didn't have any downtime. In fact, we had higher productivity. So with that said, let me quickly dive into a few slides. I'll try to keep it short and leave time for questions and answers. And okay, so name of the company is Eternovia. Effectively, what we do at a high level, and this slide may be a bit too high level, but effectively, if you look at a car today, you got a number of sensors, anywhere from radars, lidars, cameras, sonars and the actual CPUs in the car, right? From CPU, GPU, AI machinery, from NVIDIA, from Mobileye, and the likes that you know. Really, the connectedness of these sensors to these CPUs goes through what's called the nervous system of the car. And effectively, the nervous system of the car is an outdated 30-year-old kind of a beast that has grown to be not only the bottleneck for scaling the car, but also the bottleneck, believe it or not, for manufacturing the car, right? And I'll talk about that. I'll show you a slide which is very informative for you to get a sense for what it is. So what we set out to do in Ethenovia was to provide solutions for the next generation of intelligent networks inside the car to try to streamline the data transport from sensors to the CPUs with utmost intelligence and get it ready for the software-defined vehicle. As you know, the vehicles now, the emphasis in electric car and next generation cars is not only electrification, but really that intelligence and monetizing the car value as it leaves the showroom with a host of abilities and software programmability, the lead being Tesla, where you would leverage the over-the-air update for features and monetizing the vehicle. But for that network inside the car to be intelligent is very important. And it creates scalable platform and it creates an intelligent platform to be able to do that. So at a high level, the simplicity of unifying multiple networks, I'll show you again a picture in the next slide. The transparency of high-speed, low-latency data transfer. The efficiency, very, very important, right? I mean, the car is truly, as you all know, is a data center on wheel. And the efficiency of which you transfer the data from location A to location B in the car has to eventually mimic what's happening in the networks of data center, obviously at a different scale with different set of requirements for functional safety and security. And then the scalability of the architecture from edge to core and the scalability across different car entry level all the way to a higher level, an example being a S-Class Mercedes. And then the connectedness, sensor to cloud, and how it lends itself again to a software-defined vehicle is fundamental. So again, I'm going to quickly go through this slide. You guys all know this, but the cars of the past had few sensors. Back in 90s, maybe perhaps no display or one display, and maximum 25 gigabit aggregate worth of data inside the vehicle, right? And again, we're showing Audi here, but it's not. This is just an example. This is truly applicable to any kind of car. And then today's car, many of which we drive, have multiple sensors, primarily driven by cameras, multiple displays in the front, in the back, and then up to 1 gigabit worth of data to basically create the connectedness inside the car. Now, many of you may very well be in this area and working on these next generation vehicles, but the cars of the tomorrow will have in excess of 20 cameras, many of them. Again, depending on the scale, depending on the model, entry level would be lower, but I can tell you there are OEMs out there that talk about more than 24 cameras in certain class cars in 2025 car introductions. Multiple displays, 5G connectivity for over-the-air update, and then much more than 10 gigabit worth of data connectivity. And toward the end, I have a slide that kind of shows you different levels of autonomous driving, ADAS, and how it relates to the bandwidth inside the car. Now, this picture is really a picture worth 1,000 words, right? This is what you see on the top left-hand side is a picture of kind of a mid-class car. This is not a stock photo. We drew this, took us a couple of months working with some OEMs, figuring out where the sensors are, where the wires go. The different colors denote, the different technology for transport. You would have CAN, you would have LIN, you would have FlexRay, and Ethernet, LVDS. And as you can see, a car like this can have as many as 86 distinct networks, and many of them do not talk to each other. And these distinct networks, I'm not talking about 86 different protocols. I'm talking about 86 distinct networks of, for example, 30 CAN, 20 LIN, multiple LVDS, so on and so forth, but many of them do not talk to each other. And if you look at the complexity of the wiring harness in this picture is pretty significant. And it creates a mess of a wiring harness. Wiring harness is the third heaviest component, is the third costliest component. And it is a bottleneck truly for manufacturing the car. I was at the Munich BMW plant taking a tour, and everything in the factory, as you can see, is automated from the sheet metal to the engine part and so on and so forth. Then you get to where the wiring harness is pulled, it is all hand-on. And in fact, the wiring harness itself is done outside of US on a pin board. When you order the car, depending on what it is, very, very painstaking, and then ship. It's a number one reliability issue in the warranty period for the car. And it's in certain cars, it exceeds 60 kilograms. So this truly is not scalable, right? And OEMs know this, tier ones know this, and there's significant push in the industry. When we started 4 years ago, our vision was to go from left to right. And now that vision is being realized by, again, not that we were the only mover in that vision, but it was an obvious vision with some technology behind it. And we see that strong movement from what you see on the left-hand side to what on the right. And then again, if you look at the left-hand side, the processing complexity, software fragmentation are pretty significant barriers and no wonder the existing cars take anywhere from 5 to 7 years to design and get out from the show floor. It really is not scalable, right? I mean, realistically, the cars need to be, going out every 2 to 3 years, right? Not 7 years, because you start a car today, by 2029, it's obsolete, right? I mean, the features that you put in the car. Now, a software-defined vehicle will have the abilities, but for it to be truly software-defined, you need to have the scalability in the network and in the software and in the hardware that goes into the vehicle. On the right-hand side, you see our proposal for our solution, right? This is an example of a zonal architecture. It's a buzzword in the industry, which is being, used, but zonal architecture effectively says you got various zones. In this case, you got 4 zones of compute and a central zone. And you see that everything on the left-hand side is done on the right-hand side, but it's done in a virtual way, right? You see all the legacy bus support is still there, but rather than pulling wires, you go virtually through the high-speed connectivity, which in this case is Ethernet. And there's a significant reduction of the wiring harness complexity and the scalability that it needs, not only, again, from economies of fuel economy and the weight, but also from a manufacturing perspective. Now these could be sub-modules that can be automated in manufacturing. When we talk about virtualized compute, all the little dots, you see the black dots, those are ECUs. And these ECUs, electronic control units, are distinct. And you really do not need to have 70 different electronic control units with different functions inside the car. your windshield wiper doesn't need to have a ECU, right? It can be a process running on a processor on a connected car that, and I'm sure you know, a lot of the leading electric vehicle vendors are already doing that. So the virtualized compute means that rather than having 70 to 150 different ECUs, which require, believe it or not, as many as 200 independent software suppliers. That's just unheard of, right? But 200 independent software suppliers for certain class cars and coordination and bringing all of that together into virtualizing software. Again, you guys know the story of Tesla and how they're, in my opinion, they're significantly advanced in this area. And others are looking up to Tesla to try to basically catch up with Tesla with, effectively, more importantly, on the virtualized software, a unified software that would help really bring this vision together. So Ethenovia, effectively in a nutshell, right, as you saw from the previous picture, we're creating the in-vehicle networking intelligence inside the car. And we're not about just doing a single chip at the sensor level or at a specific level. We're providing solutions which would touch the sensor to the media access controller, to the switches, and to the CPU offload. And I'll tell you a little bit more about the CPU offload and the intelligence required, but we kind of contrast ourselves to Mellanox on what Mellanox did to the data center. We are doing for the connected vehicle in the networking space for the vehicle. And let me just go back to this on the intelligence requires for offload and for protocol acceleration. If you look at the connection between the sensors and the CPUs, be it at the zones or be it at the central, the efficiency of data transport is fundamental. To just make it go faster is not good enough, right? Because what happens is there's still a lot of protocol-related bookkeeping, and this protocol-related bookkeeping, if you're familiar with Ethernet stack and OSI layer, it's very CPU intensive for many of the ECUs or CPUs inside the car. And effectively, those CPU cycles should really be left for the future upgradability of the car. And a set of key technology that Ethenovia offers is the efficient transport of data from the sensors to these ECU zones, offloading the CPU, and creating efficient transport, again, in the same realms as what Mellanox did for the data center, we're doing for the vehicle. And again, to kind of give you guys a holistic sense of the current solution and at least what we see as our vision, which is being realized, is instead of having on the compute side 70 plus electronic control units, you'll have consolidated compute. Instead of disconnected data of CAN, LIN, FlexRay, MOST, you would have unified data. Now, with that said, we don't believe that the CAN and the LIN, which are very entrenched, and they are more than sufficient for, let's say, moving your seat or opening or closing your door, are going to go away. So our philosophy there is that even though Ethernet would be the backbone, the transport of legacy over Ethernet is fundamental. And that's part of the virtualization at the physical layer that we're talking about, is data transport of legacy network on the high-speed Ethernet backbone. On the connectivity, again, separate networks. I gave you an example of 86 different networks to unified network, because the car is nothing but a data center on wheel. Limited bandwidth, it's just not going to do it, right? I mean, I'll show you the next page. You would have as much as 60 gig, 100 gig, 200 gig worth of data inside the car, the wiring harness is not going to scale. It's not doable. So you have to look into these next generation connectivity technologies, Ethernet being the cornerstone and the winner in what it set out to do since 1980s. And then on the software side, instead of having, again, 70 to 150 isolated ECUs, it would be modular, extensible, and upgradable compute. And then more importantly, software, consolidated software and intelligence in the hardware to hub software for protocol acceleration and data transport. So this is an example. Again, we do this from scratch. We borrowed some from what's in the industry. But if you look at a car, from 10 years ago, 15 years ago, level 1 driver assist, and you see the bandwidth on the right-hand side, the aggregate bandwidth inside the car probably doesn't even exceed 1 gig, right? Level 2, which is called partial automation, we call it feet off, right? That really kind of then gives you the features that you see here, from emergency braking to lane keep assistant, to blind warning, blind spot warning, to parking assistant. And that would take you to about 16 gig aggregate worth of data. And again, in this example of the car, every car is different. Level 3, which is unconditional automation, kind of what a lot of car makers now are shooting for, really level 2, level 3. That's where the sweet spot of the market is. And that's where we're also focusing. We like level 4 and 5, but we think they're ways out. But you see the aggregate worth of data now for these additional cameras and data transport going all the way to 48 gig. And again, talking to some OEMs and partners, they told us 48 is already a significant underestimation. It's closer to 60 gig or 100 gig at level 3. And then, without boring you with all the detail, but level 4 and level 5, whenever they happen, right? We're not hung up on level 4 and 5. We're an enabler, but our focus is level 2 plus level 3. You see that in excess of 200 gig worth of data is going to travel through the car. So the connectedness inside the car over an Ethernet network with intelligent sensors and zones and consolidated software is what we're setting out to do. And again, to be very specific, we are doing submicron CMOS chips at the sensor level, at the MAC layer, at the switch layer, at the protocol offload layer as a holistic solution. And we've already demoed, with key customers, have a number of POs, and we're on our way to hopefully solve this very important problem. And again, in summary, Etenovia is about doing breakthrough, scalable family of products, covering infotainment, ADAS, autonomous driving, sensors, camera, HPC, and body control. And we do seamless, holistic system, removing complexity. Our motto is virtualize connectivity, virtualized compute, and virtualized software, which I kind of walk you through. And, we're on our way with first and hopefully second products to be able to fulfill this vision. Thank you very much for your time.
I was told that I missed our third speaker, and I will introduce. So our next speaker, again, a distinguished career in the United States military, David Dunaway of NPS.ai, who has had various commander roles across the United States military. Again, a very distinguished career that all of you should have a copy of his bio. And he's our speaker on behalf of NPS. And then after him, we're going to have Professor Dan Choi. Professor Dan Choi of Kookmin University in Korea will be the third presenter in this particular segment. David, the microphone is yours, and thank you for being here.
Great, thank you, Mohsen. And fascinating briefs. I appreciate them very much. And I apologize for my raspy voice. I have COVID, and it's not that bad, by the way. So,
Oh my God, I didn't know
yeah,
that.
just
Sorry
life
about
comes
that.
at you. So
You're a good man.
please excuse my raspiness. Thank you for having us. As Mohsen said, I'm a 34-year veteran of the United States Navy, retired Vice Admiral. I was a fighter pilot, a test pilot, and ultimately got into program management within the naval system. And my last job was blessed to be able to run the Naval Air Systems Command, where we design, develop, verify, validate, sustain all things in naval aviation. So I've had a lifetime of touching some of the best technology that's available to the United States Navy. And it got me excited to get out of the bureaucracy and into real capitalistic approaches to technology. And so when I retired, I sought out different pockets of real innovation and created relationships with them. That's how I got associated with Neural Propulsion Systems. I'm a co-founder in the company with the CEO, Baruz Rezvani, and the CTO, Babak Hasibi, and we'll talk a little bit more about them. But these are truly brilliant people with incredible breakthroughs that now have to find practical applicability. In our case, the practical application is autonomous driving sensors. So I will share my screen now, I hope. And start my presentation. So we believe that current autonomous driving, and I thought that was a great lead, in level 4 and 5, we believe are being hampered by the fact that we do not sense adequately in order to feed perception and autonomous driving algorithms the proper information so that we can approach this zero accident mentality. Now, we like to say it's zero preventable accidents because there's always the opportunity for those not to happen. But we also think that if we're going to go autonomous, it will approach aviation levels of safety, and we'll have to be able to support that with our sensors. In this case, we believe that the current set of sensors, as good as they are necessary but wholly insufficient. They do not have the range. They do not have the resolution at range. They do not have the all-weather capability, nor do they have the robustness that's going to be necessary to get to that level 4 and 5. There's a lot of great technology. I don't mean to poo-poo them, but we think that there's more that's necessary. So when we started this company, it was founded in a breakthrough of a new mathematical approach to signal processing. The mathematical approach is called the atomic norm, and it was applied to digital signal processing by our CTO, Babak, who I mentioned earlier, who is a professor at Caltech. And when you apply atomic norm mathematics to digital signal processing, you actually get very close to theoretical limits on what radar signals can do. It approaches maximum likelihood estimation levels of performance. And we took that core technology of atomic norm, mathematics, and digital signal processing and thought about what sensor suite would be robust enough, long enough range to satisfy the need for perfect situational awareness. And out of that, we ended up designing a 4-band radar, a long-range LiDAR, and camera system that will be fused and ultimately supported by AI chips to get the cost and thermal performance down. So we think that nobody else is doing that, and we're very excited about this technology and where we're headed, and I'm going to walk you through it very quickly and look forward to any questions you have. As I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of discussion about this zero accident mentality. Zero preventable in my estimation. I don't want to overstate what we're talking about. There will always be opportunities for humans to do things that aren't quite right. But Volvo, GM, VW, Mercedes, everybody's talking about it, including the Secretary of Transportation. Our approach was founded, as I mentioned before, on seeing everything sooner, clearer, and further away. And we believe that the market is tremendous, and Mohsen mentioned it before, but the total addressable market for all forms of transportation is upwards of $9 trillion by 2030. Our product, as I mentioned, is multispectral. We have 4 bands of radar because it's required in order for you to take advantage of each band's strength and avoid the weaknesses. We believe that this algorithm that Babak has implemented into digital signal processing is a real competitive advantage that's going to take anybody who wants to try and approach it years to try and catch this company. We've spent the last 3 years really implementing it into a solution. We do not see anybody in the markets that is putting together this full spectrum solution. And we think that by 2025, we will be on cars and actually on trucks, which we think is the first market, by the way. I agree that level 4 and 5 for automobiles is a ways down the road, but level 4 for trucking is approaching pretty quickly. And clearly, there's folks that are trying to implement that on certain routes right now. As Mohsen mentioned, we have a great defense applicability, and that's where I spend a lot of my time. We have already received 2 contracts. We normally this would be a pre-revenue venture startup, but in this case, we've gotten a small business innovative research contract, and the Air Force is very interested in how we can help their radars. And then, of course, Raytheon, Lockheed are also interested as well. Our team is a compilation of incredibly talented and experienced folks. Our CEO, which we'll talk about in a minute, is very experienced in this world. And I've had a lot of opportunity to deal with a lot of very intelligent folks. This is a group that I would take anywhere in the world and proudly work with them because of their experience and their technical abilities. So to that end, the CEO and founder is Behrouz Rezvani. He IPO'd Ikanos and is the founder of Ikanos, and IPO'd Quintana. He's a serial entrepreneur. I love working with this guy. He's a force to be reckoned with. Babak Hasibi, I mentioned earlier, professor at Caltech, a lot of time at Stanford. He is the student of the gentleman that invented the algorithm of Esprit, which is how we currently do angular resolution in many of our radars in defense. And in fact, Paul is on our advisory panel and has really been instrumental in helping us understand where we are with this atomic norm mathematics. Other key folks, Larry Burns, formerly of GM, formerly of Google, an icon in the automotive industry. Heinrich Wolbecken is on the board. Jim Buckley was the CFO of Nest. This is a talented team of folks. So the trucking market, we approach it first because it appears to be the market that is going to be able to adapt to autonomous driving first. As you go and you dissect that market, you find things like a driver is 47% of the cost of a truck going down the road. Accidents and insurance raise that up. We believe there's about 55% of the cost per mile that can be eliminated by going to autonomous driving. We did not know this, but 10, 12% of trailers are out of service all the time because they hit limbs and branches and low-hanging pieces of obstruction on a routine basis, and then they get put out of service. This is a growing industry. It's a growing industry that has a shortage of drivers. It has increasing insurance costs, and it's primed for an autonomous driving solution. To that end, there are several companies that are icons in the world. TuSimple, Embark, Waymo, they are spending a lot of time driving routes, but you'll notice where their routes are. Their routes are in the south, where the weather is good, where the highways are straight, and where there are no obstructions like there are in the north when you have snowstorms, rainstorms, and messy weather. When we get our system put together, which will be at the end of this year, next year we will be driving routes from Milwaukee to Chicago. And we'll be doing it in the worst weather conditions possible, because we believe that this is never going to work if you can't get the performance in all situations that's necessary to succeed. So we focus a lot on making sure that our system is robust enough to fill the holes that are currently being presented. One of the things that we spent some time on is what are the operational requirements. We'll go a little bit more in detail in a minute, but really there's about a 35-second response time that's required when you have a truck that's fully loaded. And currently the 300 meter, which is really a best case for most LiDARs today, is going to make trucks slow down so much that it's an impractical solution in many conditions. This is really going to require something that can penetrate an obscured vision for a LiDAR and a camera that can give you the kinds of range on targets that are really important, so that you can keep your system going at speed and fulfill the operational need of trucking as well as the safety need of trucking. We've gone to many customers. We have talked through many requirements, and we've designed our system to meet these requirements. It's about a 35-second, 1 kilometer at 65-mile-an-hour range that is necessary. We are clearly meeting that. Through heavy rain, fog, and snow is important. That is a multimodal sensor fusion. Our 4 frequencies have strengths and weaknesses that we mentioned earlier. 915 megahertz, 5.8 gigahertz, 24 gigahertz, and 77 gigahertz all have different fidelities and different ranges, but when you work them all simultaneously, you can get over the negative aspects and capitalize on the positive. Our radar, actually at 915, we can see through obstructions, many obstructions, like trees on a curve in the road. And we even believe that in urban environments, our 5.8 and 24 gigahertz, we can manage the multipath bounce of the signal and see around corners and predict when cars are coming through an intersection that we might be getting ready to cross. Our LiDAR is fascinating. I'll show you a little bit of data that we had in demonstration with Waymo. The LiDAR is getting performance out to about 1,200 meters. I'll show you some 800 meter data. We don't see anybody in the market right now with anything over 300 meters. This long-range LiDAR is really remarkable. Detecting and tracking pedestrians at range is really important. We've demonstrated that as well. And one of the Waymo requirements was the ability to see a motorcycle passing a truck at a kilometer, which we have also demonstrated to date. So the system itself is founded in the atomic norm algorithm. We will ultimately have AI chips, but right now we are running on FPGAs and GPUs. It will be a solid state MIMO LiDAR and what we call a sparse wide aperture modular radar that is backed by this algorithm that helps us see to theoretical limits of radars. This is an image of our enclosure for our first prototypes. I'll give you a little more perspective on the next slide. This is it on our Rockin' minivan, which is great. But you can see the enclosure on the top, and it's being populated now as we speak. We will have our radar and LiDAR operating this in a couple months. It'll be a couple months, and by the fall we'll have our full LiDAR radar suite in 4 bands operating. Well, it'll be late fall before they get operating. So the platform itself starts at the very bottom with this atomic norm framework, and that's where the math is involved. And it's fundamental to making a difference and to our competitive advantage. Then we put that into a processing architecture that's very intense. It's a tremendous amount of processing. And I thought the previous brief on how much information is going to be flowing through cars was quite germane. We are really going to have to get our heads around huge amounts of information flowing back and forth. This will feed into our Atomic Sense platform, which has, as I mentioned before, the LiDAR, the radar, and this quantum edge processing that will ultimately be turned into silicon. Right now, we're thinking in the 26, 27, 28 timeframe. We can run on GPUs up until that point. This is an image that is zoomed in at 800 meters. You see a truck and a human on a bicycle, and you see a cone to the right of that human and a cone in the near field. This is a 1 pixel image from our VCSEL flash MIMO LiDAR. This is 1 pixel that's detected the truck at 800 meters, the bicycle at 750-ish meters, the cone and the cone in the front, and it's performing exceptionally well at range. And we will have an array of these VCSEL LiDARs presented from plus or minus 2 degrees, plus or minus 12 degrees in azimuth, 2 degrees in elevation. So when we look at our competitors, we see that there's a lot of information that's flowing. There's a lot of great sensors out there, but they do have limitations. Couple hundred meters on LiDAR, couple hundred meters on radar really aren't going to get you the kind of performance that you're talking about. Our pedestrian detection is out to 800 meters, and that will work in bad weather. Our sensor data processing, as I mentioned, we are doing front-end processing with FPGAs. The back end is run on GPUs. Ultimately, once we get the algorithm really refined, we will spin those off into ASICs to get the costs and the power consumption down. And then all of this will be fused into an image that is multispectral, because that is what's going to be necessary so that you can have the robustness to do autonomous level 4 trucking with proper range of sensing. And lastly, our products is we call them quantum edge systems. The QES 1000 is for autonomous trucking. It has all of the components. It can scale back. That's a 2.4 meter aperture on the top of that truck. 1.2 meters on the top of a robotaxi or a car. And then ultimately, the componentry can be broken into modular pieces and integrated into an automobile. And as, of course, technology evolves, by the time cars are ready for full implementation of level 4, level 5, we think that we'll have all the processing and experience that we need to take our system and hide it through the bumpers and the glare, the windshields, and the different places where sensors are being placed on cars right now. That is our product, that is our story, and I really appreciate the time and look forward to any questions that you might have.
Thank you very much, David. A wonderful presentation. Any questions for David before we lose David?
Can I ask a question?
I will ask, one of the panelists asked a question. One of the attendees, actually Alexei. Hold on one second.
Okay.
Yeah, I can ask a question.
Please.
Go ahead, Alexei.
So my first amazed what you guys trying to pull together. It looks fantastic, and I wish you absolutely best luck. The question was, your probability of failure is growing with a square of complexity. And so everybody else is trying to focus on radar, and there are multiple radar companies, or you have LiDARs and you have multiple LiDAR companies, and you have neuromorphic single processing chips, plenty of them. And we funded a company called DeepScale and sold it to Tesla for sensor fusion, et cetera. So there are many players. And each of them is focusing on a particular piece of the entire stack of AI stack. And traditionally, in IT industry, if the market is expanding and the market is growing rapidly, players tend to focus on a particular domain to dominate a slice. And then market stops growing, you're forced to expand. And that's what Google does, making their own silicon, and Apple does, making their own silicon, Amazon does, because the market stops growing. You must expand. And so the question for you guys, why you decided to go the entire perception and cognition stack end to end, instead of starting with more kind of small-ish and less ambitious goals? Why you want to take it all in one swing?
That is a great question, and it's the engineering conundrum. So many companies are so good at their stovepiped cylinder of excellence that they then hand it over to an OEM or a tier one supplier, and then they are put in the difficult position of trying to horizontally integrate that technology into an automobile, an airplane, whatever the case may be. My experience in that world has been it is crude, it is sub-optimized, and you consequently get architectures that are not good, and like the previous brief that we saw, it's the byproduct of individual technologies that are developed one at a time and tried to integrate after the fact. Now, we can, in fact, sell our radar. We can, in fact, sell our LiDAR. We can, in fact, take the best cameras on the market, the best software for object identification. We can do all of those things like everybody else is doing, but you will get suboptimal performance. Mm-hmm. So we just decided that we were going to go for optimal performance. And we do believe in designing for reliability and redundancy. We do believe in designing for robustness and failure modes. And our system is got enough componentry that is very fault tolerant. And so we think that for trucking, for sure, the full system is the only way to go to start. And that does not mean that we would not sell our radar, because that 4-mode radar is really interesting to a lot of people right now. And folks like Waymo have put a lot of money into their architecture. They're not going to want to throw away everything just to take our system. So we will, in fact, subcomponent our system, but it is designed very modularly with very open approaches to how we integrate. But that's a great question. Thank you.
Thank you. Much appreciated. Best luck.
Thank you.
Motion, we've altered our schedule a little bit, so because Sunny Dillon, who was supposed to participate, has suddenly been pulled away, and we've also asked Professor Dan Choi, sitting next to me, who was going to participate in the takeaways and general discussion, to replace and ask questions and make discussions on behalf of the panel discussants here. Professor Dan Choi?
Yeah, this is Dan Choi, and I'm sorry that I'm not prepared to give a presentation precisely, but I'm here to help Mr. Mozami to conduct Q&A sessions here. Thank you. And as I heard presentation from David, I have one question to ask. You looks like you're the specialist in LiDAR, and currently we're using 905 nanometer LiDAR sensors that is not completely immune to the eye safety. And one of the restrictions that we have with that 300-meter detection range was to prevent possible damage to the eyes. Now, I heard that a lot of people are working on developing the new LiDAR sensors based on 1550 nanometers, which is very safe to the eyes. Now, we don't have that many autonomous vehicles driving on the street, so we're okay with 905 nanometer sensors. What if we have many, many autonomous vehicles on the road? Are we good to live with this 905 nanometer LiDAR sensors, or we will have to move on to 1550? What is your thought on that? That's my question.
Yeah, great question. So you're right. 905 nanometer, you can burn people's eyes if you're not careful with how you do it. Now, when we are pulsing for our long range, the way we meter our pulses lowers the light density and gets you to eye-safe levels for our detections out to, we think, 600-ish or so meters. When we want to use the LiDAR for much longer range, the 1,200 meters, it's eye-safe out to outside of 3 meters. So what we do is we use our radar and a much lower density pulse close in to make sure that nobody's by the car. And oh, by the way, you don't want to see far unless you're driving 70 miles an hour on a highway. And if somebody's within 3 meters of your car on the highway, the last problem they have is eye safety. So that's how we're handling the eye safety issue, is we make sure that we're clear for the 3 to 5 meters of eye safety when we're doing our strongest pulse sequences. And then we transmit at a lower power until, in a more confined environment. That's how we're handling it.
Good. Thanks for your comment. Thank you.
Sure.
Okay. There's another question coming from the floor here. Chairman Ko would like to ask a question. Go ahead.
좋은 발표 잘 들었는데요.
Thank you very much. I have a question to David. Tesla, without LiDAR or radar, using only camera, they are trying to develop autonomous vehicle, right? And some time ago, Toyota also took the similar position. Without LiDAR, only using computer vision, they have declared that they will be operating their autonomous vehicle. So what is your take on that? The future of autonomous technology. Without radar or LiDAR, do we really need that? Or can we take the positions of Tesla, just using camera, can we operate that? So that is my question.
I hope somebody can translate for me.
Translation 안 나갔어요?
No translation. Okay, I will rephrase it.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Question about Tesla's approach for the autonomous driving. They're using camera only. And recently, Toyota also announces that they will use camera only when they do the autonomous driving. Do you think it's really going to be happening? Camera only?
No, I personally do not. I don't believe you will have to slow down too much and too often, and end users will not appreciate lesser performance. You must either have equal to or better performance with autonomous driving sensors. And so I do believe that just camera, although cameras are fantastic in a pristine environment, they're not good enough to handle rain, foggy conditions. You're just going to have to slow down too much.
Thanks for your comment.
Again, I am a second generation Tesla owner myself, and although highly reliable, but there are certainly edge cases that I have personally experienced very dangerous reactions by Tesla's autopilot. In one case, almost something serious could have happened. So again, there are limitations on the usage of camera.
I have a question myself. I'm concerned that we build all these wonderfully clever, intelligent machines. I think it was referred to as data centers on wheels. But some of these data centers are not as smart as we think they are. And there are instances of drivers thinking that their cars are actually very, very smart. We've seen ideas of no feet, feet off, no hands, no eyes, and even I think level 5 was referred as no mind. It seems like we're asking people to go no mind with very limited intelligent cars. So how do we bridge that gap between what people, I think people's stupidity and the machine's stupidity? Yeah. How do we reconcile that?
That is a great question. So the levels of driving, level 1 and 2, we all drive with level 2 now. All my vehicles are level 2 and 3. 3 requires you to pay attention. And I don't know that we're ever in this middle ground where we are asking people to pay partial attention. I don't think we're ever going to be satisfied with the safety record that occurs there. I have a long history of this middle ground where your airplane is doing half the stuff for you, but then you've got to do the other half of the stuff for you, and you got to think that through and figure it out. And most naval aviators don't do that. They just won't do it because you get distracted. You can't bounce back and forth between the two. So it's a level of discipline, and I think Mohsen said it best. Tesla's a great vehicle, but you've got to tend to it, and if you don't tend to it, it can get you in trouble. Now, when we go to level 4, you're not going to have to tend to it, but you could. And so the question, I think, the way I would answer your question is, it's not till we get to level 4 where your sensor suite is adequate, your perception engine knows how to interpret your sensor suite, and your autonomous driving algorithm has a billion miles behind it to where it is making decisions that are going to keep everybody safe. My personal experience with airplanes and very, very detailed integration of airplanes is that we can now, with computers, fly them better than pilots. That was not the case when I was a fighter pilot because I had to fly the airplane better. That's the perception we had. But nowadays, we land airplanes on aircraft carriers incredibly precisely because the computer, not the pilot. And that's where it's going. It's just going to be a cultural shift, and it's going to have to be level 4 before we get the safety that's necessary to get the trust of the customer base and trust of the regulators, which are the two biggest problems that we have.
And again, when you get in a plane from Seoul to San Francisco, on average 260, 280 passengers on board, what percentage of the flight time do you think the pilot drives versus computers?
Very little.
Very little. Yeah. And we all feel comfortable with 280 people, sleep, eat, drink, watch movies while the computer does its thing.
Mohsen, the big difference is that the pilot who is piloting the airplane has tons of experience, has to go through a lot of qualification, and is very well trained, we think, and very well paid as well. Unfortunately, we give licenses to anyone to drive. I'm not sure that many of the people I see on the road should even have a license, and yet they will be allowed to have a autonomous vehicle in the future, and God knows what they're going to do, okay, or what I will do. So that's really scary.
Will year die in automobiles.
Sorry.
And you know,
1.3 million
again, I think as humanity we adapt and change. You know, I when I graduated from Stanford in 1985, my first paycheck was $864. I went to deposit it into an ATM machine. I said, "Oh no, I'm not going to trust it because this is a lot of money.
That is good.
And this machine is going to lose my money." I went inside the bank. I stood in the line and I deposited my bank. Today, I have a little bit more money than $864, and I have no idea where the money is. It's somewhere in the cloud, and I push a button on my iPhone. $1,000 goes from here to there, and so on. Where is my money? Good. So again, the same user, the same consumer, the same unsophisticated consumer of technology, Mohsen, now deals with the cloud money. You know, and so it's just, I think we adapt as humanity.
Mohsen, if your money gets lost, sorry to say, it really doesn't bother me, okay? If your car goes out of control, it's gonna bother the hell out of me, okay? What are you going to do about that? Yeah.
Great.
David, you were going to say something? Yeah.
Yes, sir. You know, there's about 1.3 million people a year killed in automobile accidents because of human judgment and errors. And the truth of the matter is I am positive we can do better in the next 5 years with proper sensing, proper perception, and proper intercommunications between these systems. We can do better. The problem I think the industry is going to have is the expectation is going to be that we need to do perfectly. That's going to be the problem. We'll kill 1.3 a year by letting people drive cars, a lot of those folks that you're talking about. But if we break that down and we save 1 million of them, all we're going to talk about is the 300,000 that still die.
Fantastic. Okay. I think, Chairman Go? Yeah. If there are no further questions or discussion points, I think we can move on. I think Chairman Moon is very keen to give us his take on the session today. Chairman Moon?
Well, it will be very short. We learned a lot, and
잠깐 마이크요, 마이크.
well, today we learned a lot from Silicon Valley, and especially from 7 to 8 speakers, including David Dunaway, who shared his the vision and the strategy and the technology allowing 850-meter vision, which will save human beings from car accident in the future. So I appreciate very much about your effort and your vision and your businesses. And I'll vote for you rather than voting for Professor Yun. And you will be a winner for today saving a human being in the future. Thank you very much for your strong support to Silicon Valley Business Forum being held in Korea in consortium with the International Electric Vehicle Exposition. I hope you can visit Korea next year. By that time, I believe this coronavirus will disappear to some extent, and you will feel much more comfortable to visit Korea next year. So we'll send an invitation to you next year. Thank you very much for your patience even in the very late in the night, and let's keep in close touch.
And with COVID.
Most people in Korea have been with COVID or been with friends and relatives with COVID, so no problem at all, okay? Thank you, Dr. Moon. And I think there are some people from the East Coast who are keen to switch off and go to bed. We know Vincent, who was at a crazy hour, is probably not on the air now. We want to have a takeaway or a wrap-up session here. And those of you who feel very sleepy may look at our videos later on. To begin with, I would like to ask Chairman Ko Young-ha, who is one of the premier and the most productive VC, venture capitalist here in Korea. He is in charge of his company that he founded, which is the Go Venture Forum. And he's already asked some questions, but we're going to ask him to give his views on today's session. Chairman Go. You know that you can hear this in English if you switch on to your
Hello, this is the interpretation channel 123 123. Can you hear us? Can you hear us? This is the interpreter.
저는 이 세션을 통해서 정말 많은 것을 배웠습니다. 저희가
I've actually learned a lot in this session. Well, Korea is in a very difficult situation now. Well, Republic of Korea has grown very rapidly over the past couple of decades, so we have become one of the top 10 economies in the world. But we are losing the growth momentum these days. At this point in time, it's very important for Korea to create new growth momentum. And through this session, I've received a lot of inspiration. I think the power of the U.S. comes from Silicon Valley. And technology is developing at a very rapid pace. And Silicon Valley has become the hotbed of global innovation and has become the driver of the U.S. economic growth. And Korea is no longer satisfied to be a fast follower. We are becoming a first mover, and it's very important for us to promote the growth of innovative companies. But when you look at the startup ecosystem in Korea, it is by far, it falls behind that of Silicon Valley. Silicon Valley is the hotbed of global capital and global talents, and it's creating a very fertile ground for successful innovation. But that's not the situation in Korea. Well, I have realized that many companies in Silicon Valley, based on their cooperation with manufacturing giants in Korea, have managed to achieve a lot of success. But startup companies from Korea, they are not effectively collaborating with giant companies from Korea. Samsung or LG, these major Korean companies, have their offices in Silicon Valley and is successfully and actively collaborating with Silicon Valley startup companies. But startup companies in Korea do not have enough opportunities to cooperate with the major Korean companies. I think that is one of the source of major problems in the ecosystem for startup companies in Korea. So in order to resolve and overcome that kind of impediment in Korea, those who are investing in Silicon Valley, I hope we should encourage them to pay more attention to startups from Korea. And we should really encourage large corporations from Korea to pay more attention to Korean startup companies. Global companies are making a lot of investment in incubating their own startups. But what about Korean companies? Large Korean companies, when it comes to investing and growing startups on their own, they have been not so generous. So, starting today, I will visit more Korean companies, especially the large Korean companies, and convince them that we have many competitive startup companies in Korea and ask them to pay more attention to the Korean startups. And as I've said before, I've learned a lot today. Thank you very much.
Okay, no? Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Chairman Ko. Next, we're going to have a special word from 문 대표님이 소개 좀 해주시겠어요?
So, Chairman Moon, would you like to introduce?
Representing international electrification standardization. So she's the expertise on standardization of electric car and the electric battery.
Hi everyone. Fantastic, very interesting session. Me too, I learned a lot. I was just wondering, David has left. I was wondering how self-driving cars or self-driving trucks will get regulatory approval. Because it seems to me, looking at the technology, a lot of it is there and there is incredible progress being made constantly, but it seems to me that on the regulatory side, that's where we seem to have the problem.
Motion, would you like to answer on behalf of David, if possible?
I think David is still
He's still here?
on.
David, make yourself visible or heard.
So just if you briefly repeat the question, I will answer on behalf. I try to answer on his behalf.
Yeah, so I'm from the IEC, International Electrotechnical Commission.
Yes.
And my question was, there seems to be a lot of progress in terms of technology to advance into the self-driving car area. And I was very impressed by the technology that David's company seems to be using. And
Yes.
I was just wondering if you have autonomous trucks on the street in more dangerous situations, like extreme weather, etc. If the regulators are going to follow and allow this, if you have been in contact with them, because it seems to me that technology is there, but on the regulatory side, there seems to be a lot of resistance to approve
You know,
it.
again, regulation has proven over time that it's always lagging behind innovation. However, there are some macro tailwinds that work on our behalf. Today, in the United States alone, there's a shortage of 80,000 truck drivers. Next year, that is projected to approach 150,000. Along the side of inflation and the supply chain issues and so on, again, a major issue in everybody's, it impacts everyone's life. As such, the industry as a whole believes the first line of adoption in terms of full autonomy and autonomous driving or partially autonomous driving is the trucking industry. Because typically, again, I'm talking about the United States infrastructure, forgive me for not having a more global perspective. Once you get into the highways are pretty straight, pavements are typically in a good condition, and it's an easier environment to navigate than busy streets of New York City. So therefore, trucking is a first line of adoption, and most probably, again, given the macroeconomic pressures induced by the supply chain constraints and so on, regulators have to try to do their best to catch up quickly. And don't forget the last comment I'm going to say, alongside regulation, there is the consideration around insurance. If you and I have an accident today and I'm at fault, insurance companies know how to handle that. If there's nobody driving and two entities that are no drivers are, God forbid, collide, How do you manage a liability? Who is liable for that accident? And so on. That issue is another obstacle that this industry has to address. David, if I missed anything, please add on.
No, I think that's a great answer. The other side of it is it will come incrementally, and it always does come incrementally with regulation. Like right now, we are driving trucks autonomously across the United States, but with an attentive driver. So they're sitting in the seat. What we're discovering is with millions and millions of miles is that they are intruding less and less. I will tell you that aviation learned a long time ago that the more we can keep the human out of the loop, the safer things are going to be. And so it's just going to take some time, but you make a great point. We're going to have to work our way through it, and we're going to have to prove our way forward. I believe it's going to be very clear that we can reduce the amount of accidents. Sadly, I think they're going to focus 10 times more on the accidents we do have.
Absolutely. Okay, thank you very much. Are there any further questions from the floor here, elsewhere? Moshe, are you getting any questions from through the chat box?
I am not, sir.
Okay, then I'm allowed to give a little takeaway here before we've closed this session completely. And so I would like to give my view on session 1 and 2. Both were excellent, and we had some very, very interesting insights, as well as views on how things are now and how things will be in the future. I especially want to thank Chairman Ko for the comments about linking up Silicon Valley with Korea and Korean startups with Korean companies as well. I think we also want to link up Korean startups with established companies in America as well as the rest of the world. So there's a lot of connectivity that needs to go on. Hopefully it's at a very simple and efficient way, much like Jason taught us to do. I think that we're in for a fantastic period where innovations driven largely by very smart and visionary people in the US, especially Silicon Valley-based, will be undertaking. And I don't forget that when we say Silicon Valley, we also include Vancouver, okay, as well as Seattle and all the hubs around the world that are Silicon Valley-like. For me, the most important lesson for today is that we need to keep the conversations going, okay? And in that sense, the Silicon Valley Business Forum, which has had, today is our fourth session, and I think we are serving an important purpose when we get together, either through videos or in person, to share our views, to share our concerns, to share our ideas about how things are and what they will be like in the future. We've learned a tremendous amount today, and we hope that in the future we can be more innovative, not only with the technology for mobility, but also for our human connectivity as well. So with that, I want to say thank you to Dr. Osama Hassanein for overseeing all the things from the Silicon Valley side, to Vincent, who I hope is now sleeping in London, and especially to Dr. Moon, who is so instrumental in making this all possible. And thank you to everyone around the world who joined for this conference, and we hope to see you again tomorrow. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Have a wonderful day. Thank you, and a wonderful evening.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Goodbye.
Great job.
God.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your journey.
Thank you.
I want you to keep some kind of relation with them.
No, it's very good, very interesting.